We did. We did. We were going through transportation impacts on part two of the form back in January. So, and I know this evening from my office is Dan Rourke, who's a senior managing engineer in our transportation group. So he is joining us. You'll see his name will be familiar from our letter in response to the most up-to-date Creighton Manning study. And I believe I see on the line Ken Worstead from Creighton Manning, who was working with the applicant on the study as well. So we left off there. I think we had, I can throw up part two on my screen, or we can start with, if I don't know if Ken and or Dan, there's any questions in general for them, or we want to hear it all from them first. Whatever is the pleasure of the board.
Clark, this was really sort of your purview. We have not been over the Barton and LaJudas traffic study before tonight. So shall we let them present?
Sure.
That seems to me the most prudent, since we've read it, but we haven't had an explanation.
Yeah, and I admit I don't have I read it in the past. I want to say a couple things first. It seemed like there was a little bit of discrepancy, Ryan, between some of your findings and what the Creighton Manning engineer themselves said. So look forward to just explaining how you guys came up with your numbers and yeah, some details of your analysis.
Yeah, so just to clarify, you want to review our comments or the Creighton Manning study itself?
Well, you guys wrote a memo commenting on the Creighton Manning study, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct.
So maybe that would be.
That's what we haven't reviewed.
Got it.
The Manning folks have gone over the study, but I think we need to understand your comments and your review of their work.
Okay. Got it. So I'll turn it over to Dan, and he can go through some of our comments from last August, as well as how those were addressed in the more recent updated study. So I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll summarize our letter and then just chime in with any questions. And Ken, if you want to address any of them right now, feel free, or just do it all afterwards is fine. So yeah, we reviewed the traffic evaluation completed by Creighton Manning on January 25th, 2016. A traffic evaluation update completed on August 17th, 2016. That was also updated December 5th, 2016. And a follow-up traffic evaluation completed on July 9th, 2020. And that's what our comment letter represented, the review of those documents. After the review of the sequential documents, we said the traffic evaluation and updates were completed in accordance with industry practices and methodology. The traffic volume collection, the data that the applicant gathered, followed standard techniques. And as a result of the pandemic, for the last update, they obviously revealed a decrease in overall traffic volumes on Route 9 and 9G. Creighton Manning went back and found historical data that could be projected out to the future. And we agreed with the origin destination method that they used to establish more real, I guess, data irrelevant of the pandemic. So the projected 2019 existing traffic data shows Colorusso truck trips currently represent 3.4% and 2.4% of the AM and PM peak hours respectively through Columbia Street, 3rd Street intersection. The trip generation rates were derived from data supplied by the applicant and based on average maximum rates of barge deliveries. Typical traffic impact study, if this were a traditional development project, a hotel or a restaurant, we would all typically use a standard industry published document from the Institute of Transportation Engineers, Trip Generation Manual. However, this is kind of a unique scenario here where there is no published data. So Creighton Manning came up with their own background and how they developed trip generation. And it was all acceptable through our review. We did ask for some clarifications between the 2016 study and the 2019 study, and that was from the 2019 study that we last reviewed to the last update that Creighton Manning did in October of 2020. Most of these clarifications were cleared up. Between the last update and the October update, they went out and collected actual data or actual truck trips from a Colarusso full week of operation. And they were able to confirm that the assumptions they used in their original analysis were on point with the actual data collected. I think it was almost 99% accurate. So, you know, we can make the assumption that their analysis was correct throughout. So the study proposes site distance improvement recommendations to the Route 9 and Hall Road crossing with the implementation of advanced intersection warning signs at both Route 9G and 9 intersection, and you know, we agree with that. The applicant proposed to restrict hauling hours from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. all work week, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. or from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. all week to 7 a.m. 6 p.m. Monday through Thursday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Friday. No hauling on weekends or major holidays. As a result of our last comment, as a result of increased truck, vehicle, and pedestrian and bicycle volumes at Broad Street, Front Street intersection, city may wish to consider improvements such as signing, striping to delineate right-of-way and guidance, as well as to increase awareness of the different modes of travel utilizing that small space there now. And that was pretty much a summary of the comment letter that we sent out in August 7th, 2020.
So basically, Dan, what I take from your comments is that you concurred with the Creighton Manning study in all of its elements. Is that correct?
Yep, with especially with the follow-up study that they did to confirm the volumes that they assumed earlier.
Okay, thank you. Ken, did you have anything you wanted to add? You don't have to, just wondering.
The only thing that really changed between the summer report and the October report that we sent is obviously we did an analysis of the intersection volumes, because the big question was, you know, how many Colarusso trucks are out there. And obviously we found that when you go west in the city on Columbia Street, that anywhere from 60 to 100% of the trucks on that end of the road are Colarusso trucks, because that's the route they're using, you know, to come back from the dock. And as if those trucks were to move over, you know, to the Hall Road, that being the connection that would bypass going from the quarry down Green Street, down Columbia, et cetera, you know, those intersections might be 20 to 25 intersections that they're going through across the city. And that is reduced down to, you know, maybe just a handful. that being Route 9, Route 9G, Front and Broad Street. So that was the biggest change that occurred between the July and the October traffic studies that were submitted. Thank you.
And did you all look at the maximum impact if there were 240 truck trips a day? Run one ways.
Yeah, the 284, I think, is two-way. So we looked at, essentially we looked at 142 one-way, truckloads going down to the dock. And then obviously that's over the course of a day. So we had to identify how much does that come down to in an hour, because the intersection operations aren't based on how much traffic goes through a road or an intersection on a per day basis, because you can send a lot of traffic down the road at 2 a.m. because there's nobody else on the road. So it looks to identify how much is in the peak hour. So we boiled those 142 one-way truckloads down into the peaks, and then analyzed that at the intersection level. So we did that for the Columbia South Street or 3rd Street intersection, and we also did the Broad Street and Front Street intersection. And Broad and Front Street, obviously not having a lot of traffic down there regardless, that was all going to operate at level service A. Up at Columbia Street, in 3rd, the Columbia Street approaches in the morning were going to be, level service B. 3rd Street was going to be level service A. And then in the afternoon, it's B on 3rd Street, and on Columbia Street, it's level service B and C, depending on the direction. But what we found is, if you do, from an intersection capacity standpoint, meaning, this intersection is like a bucket, and it holds a certain amount of water in it. And if we take out some of that water, it gets a little lighter. And how much lighter? If we take out the Colarusso trucks that are going through there, it doesn't get that much lighter, meaning there's still a lot of capacity in that bucket, to hold traffic. So when we took the Colarusso trucks out of it, we don't see any big improvement because it's not operating at level service, E or F. It's operating at a reasonably good level service, B and C. So when we take those hourly trips out of there, it doesn't really change much in terms of an intersection capacity standpoint. But when you take that a step further and you think about the number of trucks, driving down the road of Columbia Street, how does that affect, the apartments that are nearby? They're not hearing those, trucks rumbling by. That's the intangible part that, we can't put a level of service number on, but we can quantify that, which we did, because there are some hours where the only trucks on that section of road are called all the Colarusso trucks. So if those were to move over to the Hall Road, there are hours of the day where you have, 0 trucks, on that segment. The rest of the route, Columbia Street from 3rd going east, there are always going to be some trucks through there because there are different haulers, different entities that aren't under our control. But the percentage there will also come down, because of that.
Mm-hmm. And those percents are the 3.4 and 2.4% you mentioned earlier. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe those percents are of the total volume of vehicles going through the intersection. How much of those are trucks? So it's that maybe 3 to 5%. Now, if you take that 3 to 5% and let's expand that and look at that number, then from there the Colarusso trucks might make up. I think we have some numbers in our study. That could be anywhere from 60% to 100%, are Colarusso trucks, depending on the hour, through there.
And that's the traveling east from Third to back to the quarry. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, yep. There's obviously the trucks going to the dock are turning left to go down 3rd Street, and then they pick up kind of the Hall Road to make the last leg of it. And then when they return, they come up Broad and then turn onto Columbia, and they head eastbound on their return trip. So in some hours, the only trucks on that segment of road are the Colarusso trucks.
Okay. Clark, do you want to take it from here?
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry,
Board has
quick
questions.
question.
I'm so sorry. Questions?
Just so I'm following, if 3.4% of the traffic is trucks, what was the total traffic during that time again? Just to get an idea of how many actual trips that is. It was 100.
So just to clarify, and I'll let Ken jump in with the 3.4% is because this was something that was specifically asked of us when it came in. What percentage of the peak hour trips through Columbia Third are Colarusso trucks? So the 3.4%, 2.4%. So that's AM and PM peak hours. That's what percentage of the peak trips through that intersection are Colarusso trucks? And then just wanted to clarify that number. And then, I'll let Ken jump in terms of the rest of it.
Sure. Victoria, is there a particular, we're probably talking about the Columbia Street intersection, correct?
That's where that percent came
Yeah,
from.
sure. It's just 3% sounds low, so I'm just trying to put a number to it.
The number of vehicles through the intersection of Columbia and Third, it varies hour by hour. But from 7 to 8 a.m., it's about 231 vehicles. It goes up to 300 in subsequent hours, 323, 300, 372. When we get into the afternoon, we hit the 400s. So 1 to 2 o'clock, it was 492. And it basically hovers in that time frame or that area, 434, 475, 447. So that's the traffic in total going through that intersection. Now, mind you, that was during COVID conditions. So I would expect that under normal circumstances, those individual hours would, they could be, maybe 20 or 30% higher if everything was back to normal.
So if I'm understanding, that's about 10 to 15 trucks out of all of them, if it's at 3.4%.
Yeah, the trucks that we had, the trucks that were going through there, I don't have them totaled, but in any particular movement, it's ranging from anywhere from single digits to the highest one was 20 trucks on a movement in a single hour.
Okay. Thank you.
But just so I understand, Ken, it's 3 to 5% of the total vehicle trips through the intersection, but 60 to 100% of the trucks are Colarusso.
Yeah, at certain times, yeah.
Right.
And if I can just jump in, Clark and all, I think there was some discussion and concern about the level of service during our last conversation, the level of service at the new 9 and 9G crossings and how those are reflected as Cs and Ds and exactly what that means. And I know I gave you kind of a bit of an explanation on that, but I'd like, with Ken and Dan here, if there's any other concerns or questions about that,
I'm
to
going
bring
to throw
that
out a
up.
question to start, which is, I know, Ryan, last time we talked about those two intersections, which in fact are new intersections, as the private road crosses 9 and 9G. and the level of service there per your report are basically C and D during peak hours. It's D at westbound on US 9. And I get it that the level of service is related to delays, and the delays, I believe it's 15 to 25 seconds is C, and above 25 seconds is D. So again, the one intersection pushes up to D, which is, you know, significantly worse than the other intersections in and around Hudson. Now, I guess my question is, and I know we talked about this a bit last time, Ryan. Question is, you made the point, or maybe the case, that the through traffic isn't really affected by this level of service. But I wonder if we could revisit that in the sense that I'm a driver on 9 or 9G, and now there's trucks at 284 a day at, I believe it's every 2 minutes, and there's a 22 to 25-second delay. Your thoughts on how that might affect actual through traffic, which doesn't have a signal or a sign, but there's a through traffic. But you made the point that, well, they're not really affected. I would say, as a driver, that if there's trucks crossing there, it's, you know, dramatic increase in a new intersection. That many trucks coming through there, what that impact might be on drivers coming through, even though, as you point out, they're through traffic, there's no signal, but there's certainly going to be a lot of trucks going through there. And, you know, with human error and obviously truckers trying to get their job done, what effect that might be on the through traffic. Anybody?
Was
wanna
that to
comment?
me or to Dan to start off with?
General comment, if you guys want to weigh in.
From my perspective,
Question.
you know, you could take a road like this and you know, put a driveway anywhere along that segment of road, and based on the volume on you know, Route 9G, you know, you're going to get a certain level of service, whether you have 5 cars, you know, pulling out of that side street, or you have, you know, 50 cars, you know, pulling out of the side street. So that the amount of trucks that we have crossing, I think, is only about 12, you know, in any one particular direction. So, you know, with that volume, what does that work out to be? One every, you know, 2 minutes? Every 5 minutes. So
What is that? The 284 that's on the, you know, the maximum proposed?
That was per day, right?
Yep. So if you take the you know, if you take that maximum volume and you break it down, well, what does that mean in the hour? We had estimated it would be 12 trips going to the dock, 12 trips coming, you know, home from the dock in that peak hour. So with one truck crossing every 5 minutes, that truck driver itself is going to experience some delay when they try and cross Route 9 and when they try and cross, you know, Route 9G. So from the truck driver's perspective, you know, is that 20 to 25 seconds going to be significant? I think in comparison to driving through the 25 intersections through the city is going to be, this is going to be a quicker route for them, you know, overall. You know, how many signals do they go through when they go through the city of Hudson? So each one of those signals they're going to encounter here, you know, I might hit the green and I don't have any delay, or I might hit the red and I might have 30 seconds delay, you know, just in that, you know, route. So overall, I think the truck movements through here, it's going to be a quicker trip for them, you know, overall.
Quick comment. I know you mentioned 24, but 24 per hour is going to be one every 2.5 minutes or so. And then I guess my question is too, not just the convenience and the speed of the trucks going through, which I appreciate is Colaruso's concern. But my question, I guess, is the other traffic on the through street and what effect that might have on that, even though they're not, in theory, affected, having one truck every 2.5 minutes crossing both 9 and 9G as a max. You know, the level of service might affect, on paper, the trucks, the Colaruso trucks. But I guess I just wanted your thoughts on how that might affect other traffic, even though perhaps on paper you guys don't really think that that would have an effect. I'm saying as a driver, my guess is it might, and it could. With those new intersections at a level of service C and D.
From the public driver, we'll say, from
Yeah.
their perspective, traveling through these intersections, certainly they're driving past, some areas as they're coming down out of the city. There is I don't know if the building itself has a specific name, but the big warehouse, Hudson Barbell is in there. Certainly there's a driveway there that has potentially trucks coming in and out of it. I don't know if the prison is using, Power Avenue. Obviously, as the public driver driving through the city of Hudson, they're, encountering these trucks traveling down Columbia Street, at all of these intersections. So I guess my point with 9G and Route 9 is that in their sense, they may actually be experiencing impacts or interactions with trucks in fewer locations than they are currently, because there's 24 intersections where these trucks are driving through the city now. And if it moves to this haul road, it now reduces down to essentially 2, 9 and 9G. But certainly when they're driving down those roads, they're going to come to an intersection where, there's going to be a truck, waiting on one side to cross, and every 5 minutes, from one direction or another, there's going to be a truck. So on average, it's 2.5 minutes, throughout the course of an hour, there's going to be one truck from one side or the other. But my personal opinion is that overall, they'll have less interaction with trucks here on the haul road than they will do on their current route through the city. And Dan, I don't know if you have any thoughts you want to add.
No, I think you summarized it pretty well. I mean, they're not going to have as many interactions, yes, especially on the city streets. And they also, they have reduced chance to be behind or following the trucks on their existing route. The delay will be experienced by the trucks on the whole road. The through movements on the 2 state roads, the vehicles, their level of service of through movements will be the same as it is now, if not a little better.
I just want to make a quick comment too. My understanding is that the application, they get it that the notion is to get the majority of trucks off the city streets, but my understanding is the application that Kalamazoo does not make a definitive statement on avoiding or completely avoiding the use of the haul road or of the city streets and the truck route. So there still could be some Kalamazoo trucks on city streets with the approval. Again, is my understanding of the application that there was no ironclad agreement to remove all trucks from city streets, even with the approval of the private road. I think all this is very helpful, and I just want to jump ahead to guess just some of the maybe some of the bigger picture issues, which is, and again at this level of detail is very helpful and informative. I know we're here to assess whether there's none to small or moderate to large impacts on the city intersections or on the related to traffic. And I guess my first comment is I appreciate the fact that we're now agreeing that the operations of the dock affect the city streets. And clearly the operations, couldn't operate. The functions on the dock couldn't be in operation without the use of the city infrastructure and the surrounding roadways. So I know that's been sort of a point of contention, but I just want to make the point that I appreciate the fact that this conversation is very much about the operations of the dock and how that affects local infrastructure and city streets. And looking at sort of, again, sort of big picture effects, I get it that there's a notion of removing trucks from the city streets, but looking at the Creighton Manning study, I believe we are charged with looking at the maximum impact. And that maximum impact, as you point out, is 284 trucks, 142 a day. And I know Victoria and others have pointed out our job here is to look at the delta, the incremental change. And that delta incremental change is clearly pointed out in the report as well. And again, I know there's debate on what the baseline is, but I think we went over this last time, and I'm happy to go through it again now, which is the incremental change in total truck counts, whatever route they're taking, but going to the waterfront and affecting the area in and around the dock, is dramatic. And it just some of the numbers that I crunched based on, the Creighton Manning study, in 2015, it clearly pointed out that there were 2,730 loads per year in that year. I can do the quick and dirty analysis here. That's based on 250 workdays a year. That's 11 loads a day. In 2019, that went up to 7,590 loads a year, again, per the Creighton Manning study. Based on 250 workdays a year, that's on average 30 loads a day. That's a 270% increase just between 2015 and 2019. Per the proposal, which is 284 trucks a day, 142 loads, so we're basically going from the 2015 level of essentially 11 loads a day, or 2730 per year. Let's just go with 11 loads a day on average, to 142 loads a day on average. And, that increases 1,290% of trucks, again, based on the proposal, based on the numbers that we received from Colarusso and the engineering studies that we received. The maximum you're asking for, and we have to look at the maximum here, is 142 loads per day one way, 242 loads round trip, 284 one way. And that's between 2015 and 19. That's a 470% increase between 2015 and the proposal is 1,300%. So that's the number of trucks we have to look at that are going past Basilica, coming down City Street, passing the park, and that's really the analysis that you've showed us. So I believe it's our job to look at that sort of delta increase, and its significance. So if we're looking at, again, I believe there's details here, but we're looking at sort of big picture truck traffic increase. I appreciate the analysis in the city streets, but I think we have to look at what the overall proposal is, whether or not Colarusso does it, whoever has that property, we are looking at a maximum that you're proposing. And again, I believe it's our responsibility to look at that maximum. Whoever has the land can run that number of trips. So,
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think it's useful to look at the same data in terms of time, right? Because if we are looking at 12 trucks each way per hour crossing the railroad tracks, that's a truck crossing the track every 2.5 minutes. And that's quite a bottleneck now, where we have anyone using the waterfront park, any cyclist, any pedestrian, any train having to work around a truck crossing those tracks every 2.5 minutes.
I have the number of total passenger or train trips passing that intersection. 28 total, 13 passenger north, 13 south, 2 freights is the numbers that I have per day. So and again, with a potentially massive increase of trucks compared to what Colorado has run, in the last years, going back to 2015, there's a significant, dramatic increase in trucks that, not just on city streets, but on, as Larry points out, and that intersection with train traffic there. So again, appreciate the analysis of the city streets, and that's all well and good, and greatly appreciated and very useful. We need to look at the maximum impact here on the waterfront. So I'm not sure if there's any other commentary, but I know we went last time through the questions. I think we got so far, but I'm happy to start from the top again if we need to. I checked the box at the top, yes, based on what I just described. There's clearly going to be potentially a dramatic increase in truck traffic. Then, and again, people chime in as you would like. Projected traffic increase may exceed capacity of existing road network. That clearly is no, because the road network can handle it. And for the record, we'll point out there's 2 new intersections which have pretty low levels of service. So I'd say that despite the low level of service at the 2 intersections, A is no. The proposed action may increase or result in the construction of parked paved area for 500 or more vehicles. That's obviously no. C, proposed action will degrade existing transit access. I would throw it out there that this is moderate or large, given what we just described of a huge increase in trucks crossing the tracks with Amtrak there. The chance might be low, but it's certainly not zero that there's some interaction between trucks and a train. Negative impact.
Well, Clark, can I just make a comment there? You do understand that trains don't wait for cars or trucks. They just do their thing and we all wait for them. So I wouldn't say there's any possible way that that the trucks could impact the trains. Nobody waits. Trains don't wait for anybody.
They also don't wait for a truck that's broken down on the tracks. I would keep the answer as we have it.
Also, I guess, Clark, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assumed you were talking about not the train itself not being able to access the station, but more so people traveling to the station, encountering the truck traffic, and that creating a problem with accessing transit.
Clark, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. Accidental there. We can discuss whether we think that that's no or small or moderate or large, but there's, history of I don't know how many times, but I've seen pictures of train accidents with trucks on the tracks.
Have we received any correspondence from Amtrak or CSX on the project in its long history?
I'm not aware of any.
I know there's been communications back and forth that I'm sure Pat and John, there's nothing that I've been directly involved in, but I know there's been communications with the railroads in terms of a potential creating another access point. But I think just only in that regard, and that correspondence has been provided in the past.
We have an on-site meeting there a couple of years ago with a bunch of DOT folks and train folks, and they indicated they were going to make some improvements to the surface of the crossing, but they didn't indicate that there was an issue with the crossing guards that were there or that the trucks were causing any trouble.
In fact, the feds and the state said that it was a safe intersection.
Yeah.
I understand you, John. I couldn't understand what you said, John.
Oh, I don't know if you were at the meeting at the tracks, but the state and the federal authorities that were there said that it was a safe railroad crossing and there was no need to change it.
Yeah.
Although I feel like this question isn't so much about the safety of the railroad crossing, but rather will people have their access to transit somehow impacted? I don't think that the trains are going to get delayed in their arrival in the station, but will people traveling, to the station encounter problems because of the increased truck traffic in the South Bay?
I don't think there's anything in the record to that effect.
Well, maybe if they're living in the park and they got to cross over the tracks to get to the station, but most people are going to come from their homes. There's no homes down there.
Yes, there are.
Oh, down on the park side of the river?
Not on the park side, but
Well, that's what we were talking about, the train crossing, the train track crossing, and would there be an issue with people having a hard time getting to the train station?
I know in the past we discussed that crossing being moved south so that we could avoid the trucks even, being in Hudson in general. That was the issue that I remember about the crossing being moved south. And it's still, I think, I know, I only, what I know about it is what the people at Colarusso told us, which is that I think Amtrak wasn't up for that, but we never really pursued it.
Yes, we did. We had correspondence and a conference. The city had correspondence and a conference with a bunch of New York State Department of Transportation officials about the potential to move the crossing. Amtrak was part of that call and Conrail was part of that call. Amtrak and Conrail said no because it's a rail yard south of there. And DOT said they would never agree to move it. They would have to have a hearing under Section 97 of the Transportation Law. And there was no basis to move it, and they would not support moving it. We had those discussions twice, and the record was closed on that probably 3 years ago.
Yeah, I do remember this, John. Do we have all that paperwork?
Yes, and I submitted it again recently when the chair asked for it, when Betsy asked for it, and I submitted a whole packet that included that correspondence and those emails.
And I would add that CSX was not at the meeting that we had at that crossing. It was just Amtrak officials and some state people. But I do believe, John, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you all suggested that that you would work with the city over the long haul to see if that crossing might be moved south. That conversation was never closed. If that's something that we would continue to try to accommodate.
Yeah, we said if you could pull together an argument and convince state and federal authorities, we would support it. We don't care where the crossing is.
Okay, just to be clear. And also, just so that we don't get too bogged down, I appreciate that we've got some experts here. And so I'd like it if everybody would understand that this is really the board's conversation. And John, Pat, everybody, if you'd like to jump in, would you please ask? I want to keep this moving. We've got a lot to do tonight.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. I think to that point, Betsy, I get the different points of view. Again, I think it's up to the board whether it's small or no impact or moderate or large.
Yes, this is our form. That's correct.
And I was going to say that, Clark, you should answer the questions the way you feel is correct.
I'm checking the boxes moderate to large.
Okay.
Should we move on?
It's up to the board, but we have to make sure that, you can support each of your answers, which is why that discussion started.
Yeah. I believe discussion, my take on it is the discussion supports moderate to large.
Okay, Clark, keep it going.
Can I butt in a second?
Oh, John.
Yeah.
Years ago, there was a second rail crossing to the south. It was about where the road comes out of L&B. And it was closed when a truck, it might have been an oil truck, was hit by a train, and they discontinued that. But there is historical record for there's being a second rail crossing
How can we get the info on that, John?
I've thought about that, and I think probably the only way might be an old map, or I don't know. I don't think there are no photographs on like the photo by Gibson site of that area. There are up near the train station. But let me think about that, because I'm thinking that it was probably back in the late 50s or early 60s that it was closed. So
I'll help you if you tell me.
yeah. Okay, I'll try to figure out where, and where we might look. History room at the library might be out.
Moving on to D. Thanks for that, John. That's correct. That's
Okay.
D is about bicycles and pedestrians. Will it degrade pedestrian and bicycle accommodations? Again, look at big picture here. If we're looking at over 1,000% increase in trucks from the 2015 numbers, and that is the crossing where pedestrians and bicycles are also using that space, I'm gonna make the case that that's moderate to large impact on bicycle and pedestrian accommodations at that crossing, or on along both front and access to the park. Any debate? Any comments? Okay. And then the proposed action may alter present pattern of movement of people or goods, again, based on that dramatic increase in trucks. The answer is yes. And then other impacts, I mean, the only, again, the comment, which again, beat the dead horse here, the total comment is the impact is really a dramatic increase in truck traffic. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I don't have any other commentary on the transportation. I'm looking to jumping ahead to energy, which I'm also on my list here. So I have no further comment.
Mark, I did have one question. I'm not sure it's relevant now. I know that Victoria was going to look into this for us, but there's a clause in the code in 325 section 17 that talks about as such uses existed in 2011. It seems to me that if we're really looking at the delta on truck traffic, it would be imperative to know what the level of activity was at the time this code was written and what we're looking at in terms of impacts today, or indeed in the future, assuming that we ramp up to 284 truck trips per day. Victoria, did you do any work on that?
So it wasn't me. We were going to ask the applicant to do the research and come up with those numbers. But we haven't sent that letter out yet, but we can do that right now. John, one of the things that we were going to ask you to provide us was the historical traffic data of the date that that provision of the zoning law was adopted.
Well, Victoria, first of all, the code reads that way, and it says as such use existed in 2011. That's a land use term. The use of the dock was as it is now for the transshipment of goods and raw materials. It's a land use.
John, that's a matter.
Let me finish.
That's a matter of your interpretation, and we've heard it before. Excuse me, sir.
Well, I've been asked a question, so I have to answer it.
So what we're asking you for is we would like to know what the level of service was in 2011 in September when the zoning law was adopted.
And I think it's important for you to know that it's entirely immaterial. However, I don't know the answer because we bought the dock in 2014.
Right. So we'd like you to follow up with the people that you purchased it from I mean, there are cases that say when something becomes a non-conforming use, you can't increase intensity. And so I think it would be consistent to say that use at the time that the code was adopted means intensity of that use as well as the use itself.
No, it doesn't. But
Our lawyer says it does, John. So
We're not here to debate that topic now. We're not here to debate that. Let me just interject. We're not here to debate the John Privateras versus our lawyers or our board's interpretation of what the code says. The code clearly says, as existed at the time, the usage is embedded in my understanding, the usage is embedded in the zoning code, saying that the function can be there. This language is above and beyond that basic understanding of the zoning code. And one can interpret, and Victoria seems to agree to this, that that extra language was very much about usage intensity, not just usage. The usage
that isn't what it says.
So we can,
John.
John, we can debate it, but I don't think we're gonna have that debate tonight. If you could just work on getting us that information.
How am I supposed to do that?
I mean, you can.
Why doesn't the city know that if that's your interpretation of the code?
So generally, when there's a non-conforming use and they come to prove their use out, the burden's on them to show that they're entitled to a particular use. So here, you're applying for a permit for continuation of an existing dock operation as the use existed in 2011. And we're asking you have the burden of showing us what that use was as of 2011.
You're saying not only are you reading the code that way, even though all of the non-conforming use cases that you're talking about are non-conforming use cases that do not include embracing the use in the code. Non-conforming use is usually when a code bypasses a use, not when it's embraced in the code, which
Right.
is very different here. But I don't know how to get that information. If you want me to try, I will. But for you to say the burden is on us to interpret what the code meant in 2011 is not, is to provide the data as to what the code meant in 2011 is just not correct. We don't have that burden. If you're misinterpreting it that way, it's your burden, but I will try to find out as a courtesy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so when it comes to impact on transportation, the selections on the screen are in concurrence from the board, and are there any other impacts? It sounded like there were no other impacts that we wanted to consider under transportation.
Anybody
Well, I
else
would like just for our own record keeping to note in section F that the board wishes to better understand the level of activity in 2011.
Okay.
I don't think we need to put that in the EAF. I think,
Okay, fine.
yeah, that's just something that we're looking for. And it will play into how we resolve these answers.
just out of curiosity, why not Victoria? Or would you?
Well, because it's not an impact. It's just saying that we're getting more information. I mean, you can put it in as a placeholder if you want.
Yes. Board is requesting information from 2011. Right.
And Victoria, or sorry, Betsy, you said September 2011?
When local law number 5 was enacted, and I don't have the exact date in September, but it was September 2011, and it was local law number 5, which is what adopted the zoning code.
Okay.
It's December 22nd, 2011.
Thank you, Steve.
And Steve?
Oh, good to move on to energy now.
Okay. And I just, if I can interject quickly, I think Ken and Pat had to sign off at 7, so I just wanted to thank Ken and Dan for being here and helping us through the transportation section. But I believe they'll all be logging off at this point. So
Thanks very much.
I'm sorry, Clark. I know you want to move on. I had one other
Okay.
question.
Yeah.
Didn't we get a request regarding truck traffic relative to the Peregrine Falcons? Is that something that we need to follow up on?
We sent that to DEC.
We did?
The issue's been forwarded to DEC, and as far as I know, there hasn't been a final response back yet.
I have not received anything.
okay, so impact on energy, and I believe that Clark, that's also with Clark. So as I don't know if you want to go through any introductory information or you just want to take it away, Clark.
Well, I'll take it away in the sense that Ryan and I had a couple conversations on this. So I've coordinated with our engineer and he clarified a number of things. Thank you, Ryan. So we actually had a chat 2 months ago before our last time we looked at this, and just a couple hours ago, just to remind myself of what we talked about. And then he, clarified a few things. So per my conversation with our engineer, the key point again is truck traffic, truck usage of the dock, looking at truck operations, could potentially grow dramatically, and that uses energy. And Ryan, of course, reminds me that any form of energy, mobile or stationary, can be included in our analysis. And it's a significant increase. So again, per my conversation with Brian, we checked the box yes at the top, and then going through line by line, there are more detailed questions. Oh, sorry, I have to move my box here. Give me a second. My screen is blocking the questions. Hold on a second, I need to change my configuration of people. Okay, good, very good. Okay, so top box was yes, and then the proposed action will require new or an upgrade to an existing substation. Answer is no. The proposed action will require the creation or extension of an energy transmission or supply to serve only single-family, two-family residents, et cetera, et cetera. The answer is no. Proposed action may utilize more than 2,500 megawatt hours per year of electricity. Answer is no. And the proposed action may involve heating and or cooling of more than 100,000 square feet of building area. Answer is no. But Ryan and I talked quite a bit about sort of like the other impacts on every one of these questions. And there seems to be perhaps some limitations of the original questions, but we have an area here to fill in other concerns. And that, of course, concern is trucks burning energy coming onto the site. And diesel trucks, again, 284 a day max, is a significant to dramatic increase from 2015. I know there's some conversation, which we probably will continue, about what our baseline is if we're looking at this as a brand new application. That's from 0. So the other impacts is truck traffic, diesel trucks coming onto the site that didn't exist previously.
Clark, with the increase in truck traffic, there'll be an increase of dock usage, which will be an increase of energy by the equipment down there as well. So,
thank you, John.
What do the barges run on?
I was just going to say the barges are pushed by tugs, so there's that as well.
All right, and in that regard, is the board considering this a small impact or a moderate to large impact?
Ryan, before we answer that question, can you add? Yeah, there you go. Are you adding the barges? Yeah, great.
And conveyor equipment. I'm seeing that's one by.
Oh, I've run out of space. All right, is that acceptable language to convey the board's intent?
Yes, I think that's fine.
Although,
Okay.
you know, just Clark, I don't want to take issue with this, but you know, shipping things by barge is a hell of a lot less energy intensive than hauling them by trucks down highways.
No doubt.
That's true.
And impacts reviewed under seeker can both be, you know, those can be adverse. Under part 3, you'll take a look at whether these potential impacts are significant and adverse. So, you know, the impact, you know, Larry, if you were going from trucking to barge, you might look at that as a positive impact. But, you know, there's a potential for impact that's been identified by the board, and then in further action, the board will determine if that's significant and adverse.
Got it. Thank you.
Again, if we're looking at the delta from whatever low level it might be, again, seems to me to be moderate to large impact trucks on that site.
Okay, board, are we ready to move on to 15? Laura, that's you.
Yep. And
No-
then, so
No,
Ryan,
like,
sorry, Betsy, what?
I just said, if you're ready to go ahead with number 15.
I am. So Ryan, we'll do with this one the same way we had with my other 2 questions, which is I'd like to make some fixes, so to speak, to part 1 first, because it impacts my answers in part 2.
Okay, let me pull up part 1 here. And you should have part 1 on your screen now. So let me know where you want to go, and we'll navigate to that and mark it up.
Yeah. Okay, so part 1, DM as in Mary.
DM.
Yeah, D as in D as in David and M as in Mary.
All right, so will the proposed action produce noise that will exceed existing ambient noise levels during construction operation, or both?
Right, so
And
go ahead. Go ahead, Brian, sorry.
the most recent iteration, it is checked yes. And the information provided is that on-road trucks, loaders, hopper, conveyor, generator, other materials will operate between 7 a.m., 7 p.m., and basically that there's no proposed removal of barriers. So that's the current information provided by the applicant.
Okay, so what I believe that Colarusso does not address is the fact that there could be consistent nonstop spike above the limit, which I guess is 5 decibels or more.
Laura, I'm sorry, can I just raise my hand for a moment? There's more information, Ryan, because we submitted a site plan. We did a noise study with a noise expert firm, and they confirmed that our operations are within the city code limit for operations, that we're in compliance. And we have a whole noise abatement plan that is part of our site plan and built in. So because of the passage of time, this part 1 was done, but then you asked for a more detailed site plan and a noise study, and we did that.
Okay, well, I'm gonna, if I finish this sentence, I wonder if that's still applicable. Where I was on, in the sentence was nonstop spiking above the limit from the sounds of multiple idling trucks was the end of my sentence. So I'm not sure that your study, John, addressed multiple idling trucks, but that's what my comment is referring to.
Yeah, it looked at all of the noise from the dock while it was operating, including trucks.
Right, but I'm talking about not just on the dock, because there could be times where there are a lineup, multiple idling trucks. And so in queue, that actually is the end of my sentence. So multiple idling trucks in queue. So I just want to put that in there and because it's pretty specific what I'm talking about.
And Laura, where are you getting this information from that it was not addressed in the noise study?
Ryan and I went through this, and I don't think Ryan disagreed with what I was saying, but this was, back a few months. So I don't know since then.
Yeah, and we again, it was a number of months ago. I can't recall speaking about this topic exactly, but what I would say is we reviewed, BNL reviewed, one of my colleagues took a look at the noise study that was provided in our comment letter from December 2019, took a look at the noise assessment. And basically what I think this is getting to is typically when there's a comparison done between ambient and operation levels of sound, it is a measured equivalent, if you will, over time. And so there are, and as you go through the noise study, there are notes about, spikes to noise when the measurements were taken from idling trucks, from other a train going by, things like that, that were above the average measured level.
Ryan, may I follow up on that with you? So the noise study is of the existing conditions?
So the noise study, what they did is they took ambient measurements at the northeast and southern property lines, but on the dock property. So there were ambient levels taken with no site operations, and then there were measurements taken during full site operations. And the comparison of those two, so the city code, the noise code says that there cannot be an increase or that increase cannot exceed 5 decibels. And what the noise study shows is that, that essentially they were within that 5 decibel increase. We were not on site to observe any of that. But based on what is provided in the noise study that's been submitted as part of the record, that's what was completed.
So sorry, Laura, but just again to follow up. So there's no extrapolation from that study to the levels that are proposed in the application, right? I mean, Clark pointed out in the traffic section that we're looking at a 1,300% increase in volume. That would seem to me to indicate a 1,300% increase in noise emitting vehicles, right? I mean, if the noise study, if the noise study is strictly based upon current levels, and those are not at the 284 trip level, then Laura's absolutely right? That the spiking of sounds due to idling of trucks, multiple trucks in a queue, could very well be happening there, and we have to figure that out.
Yeah, and queue includes that point of entry to Front Street. If trucks are lined up in queue there, waiting to get onto Front Street,
right,
you know, that counts too. And that's exactly right, Ryan. When we talked about all this, we did what we were considering is an increase in trucks. Not
And the one thing, I mean, there's very specific, you know, science and analysis behind the noise studies that is kind of reserved for people that do just that. But one you know, key thing to keep in mind is noise is not additive necessarily. So just because you take two you know, sources that are creating X decibels doesn't mean that the result is the addition of those two. So when it comes to any type of increases, you know, that does not necessarily mean that if one truck is X decibels and now you have two trucks, that's twice as much. So yeah, I mean, the noise study was completed. They represent it as during full operations. I don't think there's any information in the noise study about on the specific day how many truckloads were received, but this was viewed now, you know, a year and a half ago. So, I mean, we can take, you know, I can take another, you know, look to see if there is any information, you know, in regard to what the operation was on the day that it was measured. But I can't recall at the moment if that is mentioned in the report.
But if we're looking at impacts,
So
we
if
really want
there's
to
missing
extrapolate it.
information,
Yeah.
well, if there's the missing information, Victoria, is part of the reason why I think it's worth going back over part one. And but Larry, go ahead.
Well, no, it seems to me that if we're looking at, again, at the delta, then we would need a noise study that extrapolates forward from the existing data to the volume that is anticipated. And I got Brian's point that it's not additive, but it's not negated either, right? It's something, and we don't know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And that very well could trip us over the, you know, if I recall reading that noise study, we were at like 58 and 59 decibels on a regular basis, and the limit is 60. And that's only based on the current volume and not on an extrapolated increase. I would love to know what that's going to be.
Well, and one thing that we often see planning boards require as a level of mitigation when it comes to noise, a lot of times based on like compressor stations or something that's going to create a new source of noise, is to do post-construction measurements and a post-construction noise study to confirm that they're still within limits. And, you know, there very well could be, you know, a mathematical way to model that. But same with truck counts too. Oftentimes a point of mitigation is to do post-construction counts to confirm that it's within the limits that the board set through their seeker review.
Okay, so should we move on, or anybody else? So okay, so then in part one, DN is in Nancy.
Yes.
I answered. I think the answer should be yes. There's 2 lamps on the water tower and 4 pole lamps. So I think that the answer to that should be yes.
Yes. And that was information provided since this most recent EAF was submitted to the.
In part 1 DO, the answer should be to yes. And the reason I feel that is because of consistent nonstop diesel trucks idling while in queue and potential odor from the generator. So consistent nonstop diesel trucks idling while in queue and potential odor from the generator.
Okay.
Okay, part 1, E1A.
Mm-hmm.
Should include residential because of Cross Street.
All right.
And then related to this question, but really not in part number 1. I just want to take this opportunity to mention that the DEC says that Colarusso is to plant 20 trees on the bank. And I don't know where that fits in this process, but I just want to remind us all that that was something that the DEC says that Colarusso is to do. And I don't know how I remembered that, or maybe Ryan told me that. I somehow kept up in a discussion.
That was a condition of the DEC's permit for the shoreline stabilization work, the riprap work that was done on the riverside, to plant trees on top of the bank. And I know that has not been completed yet, as there were some concerns that planting trees along there would block some views of the river from the area of Basilica and that vicinity. So I think at one point the discussion was to do some sort of native shrub plantings that would be, limited in height. But yes, Laura, you are correct. That was a condition of the DEC permit.
All right, so now going to part 2. I mean, so that's it for my part 1 fixes, I think. And so now going to part 2.
Laura, before you start, can I ask one question?
Sure.
With the outdoor lighting, would that pertain to barges that are harboring there, waiting to take, or not barges, but tugboats that are harboring there? It's not on site, it's adjacent to the site. And there are a number of nights where what happens is the barge is there overnight with incredibly bright spotlights shining toward Hudson, and over the southern end of the park. I didn't know if that would be included in outdoor lighting. It's not outdoor lighting per se. It is lighting.
But it affects us. So how can we get that in there, Ryan?
I mean, you don't have to. It was just a question that I had.
I mean, it does affect some of the things I bring up in part 2 about lighting.
Okay, maybe that's the place to put it then.
Maybe.
That can be included in, the part 3, analysis of why the board is making their determination. But we can, I've made a note here that, the barges, when they're on site, that there is light usage there, because the lights on site, I know, are only used when they're operating, or what's been represented is that they are only used when they're operating after dark.
Right.
So typically winter, spring, but the barges or the tugs are a different situation.
Yeah, and the lights are hard to explain it. They're basically like the spotlights they use for navigation on the river. I mean, they're that bright, and they may be the navigational lights that they leave on. And it's always been amusing to me that, not amusing, it's sometimes upsetting because it blocks, nighttime view. Because
of the lighthouse. Probably of the lighthouse, right, John? In other words,
not necessarily of the lighthouse, but it's just because I don't see a view of it from where I live. So, but it is a view that is visible, from here, and very, very bright. So, but and it's probably brighter if you're down at the river. So,
Right, okay, thank you.
yeah.
Okay, so going to part 2 now. Impact on noise, odor, and light. Yep, answer's yes. And then A is the proposed action may produce sound above noise levels established by local regulation. I'm answering that moderate to large. Again, we don't have all the information yet, but that's my assessment. B, the proposed action may result in blasting within 1,500 feet of any residence, et cetera. My answer is no to small impact. C, the proposed action may result in routine odors for more than 1 hour per day. And I'm going to answer that as moderate to large impact, again, depending on a more complete study. D, the proposed action may result in light shining onto adjoining properties. Now, this one's a little bit hard to answer, again, because we need more information. But, there are the lights that they're going to have there. Can they be on a time clock or a motion sensor? I'm concerned about the Alana view shed, and the lighthouse at night. So I'm putting moderate to large, until we get more information. E, the proposed action may result in lighting, creating sky glow brighter than existing area conditions. I have a question mark by that one. Maybe those tugboats are doing that. I don't know.
Well, it gets dark, Laura, at 4 o'clock during the winter, and they can run till 7, right? So that means for 3 hours you have, we have the 24 trucks an hour, and the barges associated with that truck traffic, and the fixed on-site lighting. So it seems to me that we would need to know, does the combination of those 3 things create a level of illumination that impacts the view?
Well, Larry, the tug lights have been left on overnight. They've been left on until the morning. So long after the activity down.
I wonder, do you know if they're required to be on for for safety reasons?
I would think that if they were, it would be a thing where they'd be aimed at the river instead of aimed at the city of Hudson. I don't know, I don't know anything about what the rules and regulations are. It's not all the time. There are times when there are barges down there with no lights on. So I don't know if there's any particular reason why at one time they would do it and at one time they wouldn't. But
Well, I'm going to answer that one moderate to large until we have more information. And then, so that's E. And then F, other impacts, dust from material delivery and stockpiles. And I'm putting that moderate to large.
Ryan, may I ask, is there a definition of sky glow?
So I've got the DEC guidance open on the specific question. And so, it refers to sky glow as a brightening of the night sky over inhabited areas. So kind of what I guess I would refer to as like light pollution. That's going to create a noticeable change in the darkness of the night sky. So oftentimes we'll require, that the fixtures installed are full cutoff fixtures and, specified such that they do not have light spillover, require a photometric plan to ensure that there's no light trespass beyond the property line. And also things like using time clocks or motion sensors, depending on the purpose of the light. Now, I know what's been represented as part of the project record is that the lighting on site is only, it is not on consistently, but it is only used when dock operations in the fall, you know, when it's dark before they cease operations. But we have not seen any type of specifications on the lights that are out there. I believe they're out there now. Whether the applicant can provide, you know, specifications for what fixtures are out there, and so on, you know, that additional information would be useful to the board's review.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Lord, do you have any more questions about number 15? All right. I think, Teresa, I think you're up. Number 16.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. This was done with me consulting Ryan. I don't even remember how long ago was this, but we did over it today. So I'm just I'm just gonna do number 16 and then we'll all go over the A, B, C, and D. Ryan, could you put up the number 1 for me just as you did for Laura, just for number 16?
Oh, part 1, yes. We're gonna go to part 1, D2Q to start with.
Right, exactly.
Like.
D2Q. Okay.
And here we are. Will the proposed action use pesticides during construction or operation? The selected answer on the most recent form was no.
Any questions from the board about that? No.
I do have a question about that.
Okay.
Does that mean that they can't use pesticides, or can or cannot use? They need to declare whether or not they're going to use pesticides on at any place on the dock and or the roads ingress and egress? Or is this just dock just dock? Because it seems to me there's going to have to be pesticide use at crossings where those big Phragmites are on 9G.
So I believe.
I know we're talking about dock, but we're talking about operations, so I'm just concerned about that.
What did you say, big Phragmites?
Those big, huge, plumy swamp bee growing
invasive wetland grasses.
Yeah, they're very invasive. Yeah, Victoria, I do know that, but it's dock operations that we're looking at. And I always.
So then that should maybe be yes, you're saying?
Well, we can't say yes without data. What I might ask them to do is maybe have the applicant explain what they're doing on the Hall Road, because that I don't have those seeker papers right in front of me, but I'm sure that they can answer that question.
Okay.
But for this, we really just need to focus on the operations around the site. So making sure, you know, they're not going to be using pesticides to tamper down weeds on their site or on the other entrances.
But since, as we've talked about in previous meetings, the code, I mean, what we're reviewing is an application essentially from scratch, since they've lost the right to operate as a non-conforming use for commercial dock operations. And the way our code defines commercial dock operations is inclusive of ingress and egress. So I think that if we're doing a secret review, we have to look at the overall impacts of those commercial dock operations.
I know you guys want to do that. For zoning purposes, you're looking at everything, but for seeker, you are limited to outside of the Hall Road because the seeker on the Hall Road has been done.
Okay.
Well, yes, but it's impossible to separate that out, Victoria. I mean, we just spent an hour, the first hour of this meeting, talking about crossings at 9G and 9, right? And that was the traffic impacts on those crossings, right? And the applicant was quite interested in having us have that conversation, right? So you know, I think we have to be fair about if we're going to be looking at the improvements to city streets of the crossings at 9 and 9G, we have to look at the use of the same pesticides that allow that crossing to happen at Route 9 and 9G, right? I mean,
I mean, the first time we brought up traffic, I did say that I didn't think we should be talking about the crossing so much either. So
right.
I'm not being inconsistent.
Well,
But I mean, we could just ask the question right now. I'm because it's a wetland and it's so close to the river. There's probably an answer that they've looked at this already.
I know John's on, but is JR or somebody from? I'm scrolling through here.
Well,
John, I don't know if you know the answer to that for the Hall Road.
As to whether we're going to use pesticides on the Hall Road area?
Yes, that's the question.
Correct.
Of course, it's beyond the scope of seeker review, but we don't have any plans for it.
Okay, so the applicant is stating on the record, and you know, we can refer back to the seeker review, the seeker files for the Hall Road. But you know, the applicant is representing here as part of the project record that there is no use of pesticides on the Hall Road or on the dock parcel.
That's right. We don't use pesticides.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Teresa.
Okay, now we're going to the next one, Ryan. The E1D.
E1B?
E1D.
E1D, sorry. Facilities serving children, elderly, people with disabilities within 1,500 feet of the project site. It is checked yes, and it identifies the Kite's Nest, which is 500 feet away.
Before. All right. Any questions on that one from the board?
Is that Center for, what does that say? Laboratory education, is that the NAC Center?
I don't know if this is to Center for Liberatory Education.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means, but the NAC Center is immediately adjacent. And that is a, that's important to include.
What about the youth sailing and youth kayaking program that happens there?
Oh, I didn't know they had that.
Yes, they do.
Put that down.
Yeah, and then I think isn't that part of the DRI? They got funding for that little pavilion down there.
Yep, that's the NAC Center, NACK.
And all of that is new, right? Since they put this application in 2017.
The most recent EAF is from, I think, 2019. But yeah, it's, and sorry, Larry, you said youth sailing and was it kayaking?
Yes.
It'll be nice and safe in there for you, Larry. That new wall.
And the NAC Center.
And then I don't know, Ryan, how far is 1,500 feet? Is the train station within 1,500 feet? That's 1,500 feet is quarter mile. Is
they say Kite's Nest is 500 feet, and isn't that across? Isn't that
that's at Basilica? Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess
I can check. I can check that. I'm pulling up Google Earth.
Wouldn't the train station be closer if Kite's Nest is 500 as in Basilica?
Yeah, it seems to me that And that the
Maybe
train
200
station absolutely serves children, the elderly, and people with disabilities.
Yeah. So maybe put train station for 200 feet? I don't know. I mean, how far is 200 feet? But it sounds good.
What? Yeah, kinda.
Someone,
have to measure
someone
it?
needs to mute, please.
I think
Okay,
it was
Tracy.
JR, and he did so.
Okay.
Unfortunately, my Google Earth is not being responsive. I think just pulled up now. So let me just zoom in here. And from the corner, from basically the entrance gate to the train station, the nearest point of the building itself is 750 feet or so. So yes,
Yeah.
that's within 1,500 feet. 1,500 feet going north brings you to about the intersection of, brings you about north of the intersection with Partition. And let's see, the Union Front Street intersection is about 1,500 feet due north.
So
for reference.
Would Front Street, what is Terrace Apartments be a part of this? No?
Yes, that's definitely within 1,500 feet.
Yeah.
Yep, that's within the.
You have a portion of the Terrace Apartments. Terrace.
Is that a facility?
Well, so it's an apartment house. It has senior citizens and.
The apartment's on the west side of Front Street.
Oh, it's not.
Mhm.
I don't think it's 1,500 feet.
So the Ferry Street Bridge is just over 1,000 feet. So the corner right there of Ferry and Front is, within 1,500 feet. Almost gets you to the promenade.
So Ryan, I have a question on this. When they're talking about facilities serving children, the elderly, and people with disabilities, and then they use schools, hospitals, daycare centers, and group homes as an example. Does that not include places where people live?
I think in the respect of multifamily housing, it could be considered a facility. Probably single-family residences might be a stretch to call it a facility, but an apartment building, I think would be, just under kind of a reasonableness look at it.
I mean, they're looking for sensitive receptors, and so.
What does that mean, Victoria? What does that mean, sensitive receptors?
Well, places where there's congregations of either children, elderly, or people with disabilities. So, single family housing is not going to count as a high density place where people that are sensitive would congregate. So if there was a housing facility that was for the elderly, like such as Providence Hall, that could be a sensitive receptor.
Well, the Terrace Apartments has everything. It has the elderly, it has children.
I mean, it's fine. You can put it down. We're just fact finding here.
Yeah.
But also, just because I know this, group homes are generally actually houses, not always, but actually houses.
They are.
A certain amount of people, depending on, the rules and regulations and the agency that's doing it, live. So it could be, 3 to 8 people with disabilities living in a group home. Anyway, just a point of fact. Okay.
And the other thing I think we should add then there is the park.
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, Betsy, I did just, and I'm going to pop it over on the screen here. So we're on E1D here. So DEC guidance about facilities where children, elderly people likely to be found on a daily basis for multiple hours. It is not meant to identify facilities like parks where a diverse portion of the population may use them. Interestingly enough, I I just was reading this myself, so.
Okay, thank you. Thank
So does that mean we should take the train off?
No,
I would take the train off.
Yeah, it's not concentrated among the population. It's all people.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay.
That was a good find.
And then I believe, so E1D, we're going down to F.
Yep. F is
Has
next.
the project site ever been used as a solid waste management facility, or does it adjoin a property which is now or at once what or was at one time used as a solid waste management facility? And the selection was no.
And I agree with that because I have.
But that's incorrect.
It is?
Yeah. The site was there was an abandoned solid waste landfill adjacent. It was the South Bay dump.
Ooh. Okay.
And I'm not sure, I'm not sure that's specifically on the dock property, but there was a abandoned solid waste landfill right there. So Ryan,
Well, much of the South Bay is in the riverfront, and is a lot of it is filled land, which in prior history would have been anything would have been used to fill that land. So we can, again, as a kind of a fact finding, being all inclusive here, to select yes, and the South Bay dump as a specific. Is there any information on the exact limits of that facility as a?
We have all kinds of information about that dump, and the fact that it was supposed to be closed and it was used for years and years and years after it was supposed to be closed, and there's all kinds of junk in there. It's extremely well documented in the local paper and all over the place. So yes, I can certainly get you that information. I've read it. John, you probably remember that.
It was a burning dump for quite a while. Yeah.
Up until when? Do anybody know?
I'd say probably maybe late 50s or maybe mid 50s.
Oh, but I think it was used as a dump
kid.
after that, John.
Pardon?
I think it was used as a dump long after the 50s.
Yeah, I think I'm talking about the burning that they did down there. They stopped that, but it did go on for quite a while.
And it was a municipal dump.
Right.
Okay, so that would be a yes.
Betsy's not talking, Ryan, about all of the South Bay that got filled in with land.
Understood. Yeah.
Specific area.
That's history talking.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the next question on the part 1 form is G, have hazardous waste been generated, treated, and or disposed of at the site, or does the project site adjoin a property that falls under that? And it was selected yes. And the description provided is that the site's adjacent to the old NIMO Power Corporation site where the cleanup was conducted. And it notes the time of activity. But it sounds like we should be adding the South Bay dump to this as well.
Yes, we should.
And also the, go ahead, finish. Okay, you got South Bay dump there. Also the gas plant that's at the corner of the park.
Thank you, John. All those big gas things that were there that the opera.
Well, there was that, and the building that's there was a gas processing plant. They would cook coal oil down to make natural gas for lighting in the city.
That was the Dunn warehouse.
Yeah, and what happened in, I think it was 2004, there was a major remediation done of leachate going out into the river from there. Because what they did was they stored the coal tar in cisterns under the ground, which probably lasted quite a bit longer than they figured they would, but it was leaching into the into one of the embayments at the park. park was basically shut down and ripped apart.
A lot of riverfront parks are built on old manufactured gas plants,
Oh, yeah.
more than you'd think.
No, no, believe
And
me.
and that leads us to item H, which is the last one listed for impacts on human health regarding contamination history and reported spills at this project site or adjacent sites. So that is selected yes. And there are a number of spill numbers provided with some explanation here. The former manufactured gas plant is listed. There's some additional information as well as its spills on the railroad right away. The note here: all sites are on Water Street in the location of the current city park. So if there's anything else we want added to the Part 1 form, I can make that notation. Okay.
No.
Hey, Teresa.
All right.
Okay, so now we're gonna go to the A, B, C, and D. Okay, so it says if we mark yes for 16, then we have to answer the questions A to M. And if we mark no, we don't. So this is a yes, right, Ryan?
So the proposed action may have an impact on human health from exposure to new or existing sources of contaminants. So Part 1 of the form does identify that there are at least adjacent sources of existing contaminants. So this question gets to the point of whether there's going to be exposure to any of those substances through the proposed action.
So number 1 is the proposed action is located within 15 feet of the school, and we had said yes on that. Now, is it small or is it moderate to large? None, no, or small or moderate to large. At the time I was looking at it, I had said it was a small impact. Anybody else from the board want to say anything about that?
You have new information now, Teresa, from going over Part 1, so.
Right, but I don't, yeah, but I didn't change that one. I've changed others, but I didn't change that one. But if anyone else wants to, kind of chime in, please do.
So just some things to consider when, the board is making this assessment is, is the action creating a risk of contaminants being released? In this respect, is there, a potential for the facilities identified of being impacted by any potential release due to the action on the project site? We know that there's no representation made that any new usage or creation or processing of hazardous waste is proposed as part of the project. But really this revolves around whether the action is going to unearth or cause a risk of those contaminants being released. And for Part A here, is it is taking everything into consideration? Is it going to have does it have the potential to cause a small or moderate to large impact on these facilities that are located nearby?
And Ryan, this does not include the exhaust from the trucks. This is a different kind of contaminant.
Well, we went over that when remember the exhaust from diesel was less than, we had mentioned that back in, was it number?
Yeah, because we're talking about trucks, so.
Yeah, I mean, that I would think would more appropriately fit under impacts to air
Right.
or odors, as opposed to, the human health question really gets to hazardous waste, solid waste, things along those regard. That's not meant to be exhaustive, but the concern with diesel exhaust, I think probably more appropriately is considered under air impacts or odor impacts.
And we went over that in number 6, where there was a study done and we found out that diesel gave less exhaust. Remember, Ryan? Than
I recall having a conversation about it, yes.
Okay, all of this was so many months ago, and the scope of the whole thing has changed in terms of at least my point of view. So how do you want to answer that, Teresa?
small. Anyone else? Laura. Anybody else? I said small. Betsy. Okay. Okay, let's go to B.
But wait, can we just pause for 1 second? I'm sorry. When we say health, do we mean safety as well as health? Because I would be slightly concerned about Kite's Nest and the youth programs on the waterfront, how they interact with the truck traffic crossing the Broad Street crossing.
And one could argue barges and tugs too, for the kids on the water.
Oh,
yeah.
Look at it.
So if health is, are they going to be breathing in toxins? I think it's pretty clear that they're, it would be moderate, but is the activity potentially putting children at risk? Then I think we do have to be mindful of the traffic at that bottleneck. And what that means for children at the Basilica site going down to the waterfront, and the youth who are in after-school programs, learning how to sail and kayak and whatnot.
You've got a good point, Larry. That and maybe that should go in the question I just answered. This one, Larry, seems to be talking about contaminants.
Right. Ryan, can you bring up that screen that you often do for us that had the guideline? Yeah.
I don't know if Victoria can speak to if she has any knowledge from prior projects that she's worked on, seeker wise. I mean, it's a good point, Larry. It says human health, and that takes all the guidance is in regard to solid waste, hazardous waste, but the title itself. Let me.
It's pretty clear that wording is about, toxic, infectious, inflammable, corrosive, right? Not
so. Yeah, and the
Larry,
actual,
Well, can't we add that to M? Add it on the bottom, like M is the impact.
I think your concerns are actually transportation concerns. It sounds like you're concerned about the conflict of human and traffic and or barges.
Yeah. Yes.
Put that in, go back and put that in question number 15, or even the one that Clark's, but I think maybe 15 is better.
15 is better. Down at F, other impacts.
So, and it kind of gets to the question here under 13D about the degradation of pedestrian or bicycle accommodations, sidewalks, crosswalks, would all be bike lanes, things along those lines. And perhaps, there needs to be a greater expansion on that.
Well, let's add that to 13 then.
Okay.
I think it's captured in 13D. And when you evaluate it, you can talk about that. And I mean, if you want to add under F something additional, if you're concerned about river traffic, but.
I mean, it seems to me there's two things here. One is the degradation, meaning they don't function very well and there's less access. And it seems to me there's maybe an overlap, but there's clearly a separate item of people getting injured and hurt by the activities associated with operations. So I just want to maybe divide those two up a little bit, which seems to me are separate. Again,
Yeah.
if I'm a booker and I am, I don't go to a place that's pretty busy. Will I go there? Yes. Will the chance that I get hit be higher? Probably. So I avoid
Right.
it. There's two separate things. One is not using it because of damage to the system, or what does it say in transportation? Degradation of the existing pedestrian or bicycle accommodation. That's a separate thing from someone getting run over by a truck, in my view.
So are you saying that it should go here then, Clark?
Yes.
Okay, so Ryan, you have pedestrians, kayaks. Oh,
Oh, sorry. I'll go back to transportation. I thought we were going back down to health.
note that
All right.
the other things that were brought up were, the kids programs. That's very important. What are those programs? The
Child-oriented programming.
yeah, but that's what's the one that we just approved not that long ago? We just talked about it.
The NAC.
Yeah.
NAC.
Yeah. The NAC program, and was there another children's thing?
Kite's Nest.
Yeah, Kite's Nest. Yeah.
Ryan, while we're here, can you also make a note about the Peregrine Falcon so we don't forget that?
And the concern is with the noise or the truck traffic itself impacts the Peregrine Falcons, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We're going to need a bigger box.
Yeah. And what, just transitioning back to health, the seeker regulations do, specifically just define it as the creation of a hazard to human health. So that's pretty broad. But I'll leave it, to the board's discretion with, input of.
I mean, this really is about contaminants and hazardous waste.
Well, then why are we answering yes at the top?
I'm not sure we need to. I think that a lot of our concerns have been covered in other questions.
Yeah.
So the question really, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Brian.
Let's say as part of the proposed action, the applicant was going to install a new subsurface stormwater infiltration system. And all of a sudden, we're going to be taking a lot of stormwater, putting it underground and infiltrating it, where we don't know whether there's contamination there. So that stormwater being directed underground could cause that to leach at a greater, and it could, at a greater rate, could spread it. That's something that would be concerning if it was part of the proposed application in this regard. But the current application, there is no proposed excavation that would unearth any of that. If any excavation would need to occur in the future, the applicant would have to come back in for a conditional use permit under the city code. At which point those impacts could be reviewed.
Yeah, the rest of these questions are pretty contamination oriented. So I think Betsy's right. We've got these answered in other places.
So is the consensus of the board that 16 should be answered no?
Well, what does Teresa say?
I said yes. I mean, after all, they answered 3, 1, 2, 3. Well, they answered 3 out of 5, but they should have answered 4 out of 5 of their own questions as yes. So, I mean, and I think we should go through A through M to see if, I mean, because they're,
Yeah, we're not done yet. Let's keep going.
yeah, B is, I had a question mark for it. Because here, if they were new coming in, I guess they would be going, undergoing that, but they're not. So I just put it as a question mark. I had answered it. I just put it as a question mark. So Ryan, you're on for that.
So-
one. Remember we talked about
So
that.
there's, you know, as specifically asked whether there's any remediation going on site. There is none that has been presented as part of the project record that there's current remediation on site.
But they did go through it in the past, right?
Adjacent sites have, I don't think any of the spills or remediation sites were on the project site proper.
Okay. So that would be a no.
I think there may have been a small gas spill. I'm remembering something about that they declared and they cleaned up right away. It was nothing massive.
So, and typically, I think it's 5 gallons is the limit. If you spill 5 gallons of oil or gas, you need to report it. But typically, it's you know, those spills are quite frequent at you know, any site that's using, you know, equipment or automotive repair, things along those lines.
You know, that's what I'm remembering is that they did report, but it didn't require massive remediation in any sense of the word.
Okay.
So item C, there is a completed emergency spill remediation or a completed environmental site remediation on or adjacent to the site of the proposed action. So we know that there's, you know, especially just looking north to the park, you know, there's been remedial activities conducted adjacent to the site. But, you know, the question gets to whether there's going to be any impacts due to this action, you know, and what the board's interpretation is of that.
It does say adjacent to, and that was a huge, maybe John can speak to this because that was a huge deal.
So the fact that it was remediated back in the day, I think my reading of the question is the Colarusso dock operations going to impact that former remediation? That's how I'm reading it. So in other words, I think Ryan's example was a really good idea. If they were going to move stormwater around and it was going to go over to the park and it might create leaching over at the park or something, that seems to me
Right,
be
or
what
you know, you're next to a brownfield site and you have to dig down three stories for underground parking, and you're going to allow the soil next door to leach in, and you know, but that's not, we're not doing any excavation here or moving anything, water or earth, that would disturb those remediated sites, right? I mean,
even though they're adjacent, yeah.
Right,
Correct.
they're untouched by the action.
If they were disturbing that, we would probably ask the applicant to conduct some testing around the site to see if there is contamination that has moved onto their property, whether it was generated there or not. And then we'd take that into concern with what they were proposing to do. Since they're not proposing to do any excavation or really any modifications to the physical site, other than repaving needed, you know, the laydown yard, there's a very low probability of uncapping any of those contaminants, even if they do exist there, or causing them to change in nature.
Yeah, it seems to me like that's a no or small impact.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So moving on to D, the site of the action is subject to an institutional control limiting the use of the property. So that's something where I believe, and you know, like the park is probably limited to the uses that can occur there because of the prior contamination history. So there is no institutional control on the parcel that is part of the record.
Okay.
Okay. Item E, the proposed action may affect institutional control measures that were put in place to ensure that the site remains protective of the environment and human health. So in keeping with the last one, there's going to be no effects to any institutional control measures. Any questions or concerns, or is that a no to small impact?
No to small.
Okay. Item F, the proposed action has adequate control measures in place to ensure that future generation, treatment, and/or disposal of hazardous waste will be protective of the environment and human health. So anything that occurs on the site, I mean, the main concern I think would be that there could be a spill of fuel or oil, and the applicant has to comply with New York State regulations on spill reporting in response, and has been discussed. They have conducted those notifications and responses in the past. There is no other generation or treatment of hazardous waste.
No.
Okay. The proposed action involves construction or modification of a solid waste management facility. None is proposed. The proposed action may result in unearthing of solid or hazardous waste. There's no excavation proposed as part of the project.
No, not that I know of.
I
didn't know of anything.
The proposed action may result in an increase in the rate of disposal or processing of solid waste.
I want to ask a question on this one. What do they do with the gravel? Okay, when the gravel comes, they wash it. So they leave the operations clear every day. Do anyone know?
We don't wash.
You don't wash?
No.
I thought you.
According to our site plan, we have a dust control plan that we implement as set forth in the site plan, but we do not wash gravel at the site.
So you spray water on it or something? Is that for dust control?
Sometimes for dust control, sometimes on the gravel, usually more on the roads, on the pad.
Okay.
But washing gravel is a whole separate operation.
You do it there. Do you do it at all?
Pardon?
You don't wash it at the dock. You don't wash it at all.
We don't wash it at the dock.
Okay. I thought you did. I apologize because when I was
All right.
I thought that's what he said. Because I was wondering where did you get the water from and where does the water go? So you don't do that there. Okay.
No, we just have a water truck that we use when we have to, according to our site plan.
And that's only for dust control, right?
Correct.
Okay. So that would be no.
And any solid waste generated would be, minor. There's no major solid waste. It's just from, employees, just kind of typical minor solid waste that's managed on site, but no processing or disposal. Nothing in the respect of the solid waste management facility.
Okay.
So it sounds like we're checking no to small. Item J, the proposed action may result in excavation or other disturbance within 2,000 feet of a site used for the disposal of solid or hazardous waste. So this is there are within 2,000 feet, as we've discussed, solid or hazardous waste deposits, but there is no proposed excavation or disturbance as part of the project, the proposed action. Any concerns from the board? Hearing none, it sounds like that's another no to small impact assessment.
Okay.
Item K, the proposed action may result in the migration of explosive gases from a landfill site to adjacent off-site structures. No to small impact may occur. Any questions or concerns? All right. The proposed action may result in the release of contaminated leachate from the project site. None that's, you know, part of, there's no activity. Again, going back to the stormwater question, if we were directing stormwater to the ground, there might be a concern there, but, you know, there's no changes and no, you know, no proposed excavation or changes that would cause the release of leachate.
Okay. No.
And
Ryan,
are there any?
I do have a question. Going back to remediation, where do we put in that the coal tar from the gasification plant that's in the river, that remediation hasn't begun? Does that belong here somewhere?
What site is that on?
It's adjacent, it's from the Dunn building, the old gasification plant that John was talking about, that's immediately adjacent. And there was a tremendous amount of leachate from the coal tar. And so that's going to be an ongoing, I just don't know where it belongs. I know that's a project that's going to happen. I just don't know.
But I think this proposed action, the question is whether this proposed action will impact that remediation.
It could, because the coal tar just, it went out of the upper of the two embayments in the waterfront park over a lot of years. So I'm sure that probably there has to be some discovery done as to how far up and down river leachate may have gone. That's just, it's not based on any technical knowledge. That's just my hunch. But I would think that it would have to be, explored in both directions because it's tidal water. And when the project was done, or just before the project was done, you could actually see the sheen on the water going out into the river. So, don't know, just my impression of what might have to be explored when they do a cleanup.
I just don't know what to do about things like that, Ryan, because we've encountered a couple of them now, and the form isn't perfect, as we all know, this form is really not designed for this kind of an application, but I just don't think things like that should be lost in time.
Do you think maybe there's somebody at DEC we might be able to check with about what, if there is a schedule,
a plan
for doing that?
Yeah, the DEC would certainly know.
I would hope so.
I would hope so too.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, and Victoria can weigh in from a legal and case law sense, but going through seeker, the intent is to take a look at what impact the proposed project is going to result in or may result in. So when it comes to the potential or the future cleanup of or remediation of the coal tar concerns from the Dunn warehouse, how will this project impact that either positively, adversely, or not at all? So that's kind of the consideration that I would give to this specific topic. How is that is that potential remediation impacted at all by the dock operations? And if so, is it positive or negative? And to what degree?
Yeah, I suppose if a massive remediation was done, it would probably halt dock operations.
Well, and to some extent, if that project is not fully conceived yet, that project would have to take this project into consideration when it was making its plans.
Okay, I see.
Okay, now, does anyone have anything to add into M? I had added dust, but I noticed that we have it, so I'm scratching that. Now that I see that everything is a small to no impact, now I go back up and I change it from a yes to a no. That's how I did this.
So I think we can leave this selected as yes. There's nothing wrong with saying that, there may be some sort of impact, and then upon further review, that there's no significant adverse impact, and therefore we just, these questions are very broad, so I think it's fine the way the board has filled in the form.
Yeah, because when I had learned it, it said if none of these are large or moderate, then that changes. But you answer that first. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any questions?
So unless anything else for human health, that brings us to community plan.
So I want to take a gut check of the board. It's 8:15. We have two more questions. These are pretty big ones. I imagine they might be a bit time consuming. I'm happy to keep going, but I want to know how you all are feeling.
I wouldn't mind keep going. Get it over with. But that's just me. I'm finished with mine. I can sleep the rest of the way.
How are we feeling? Okay.
I think we can keep going, Betsy. I would think though that I mean, unless the board disagrees with me, assuming that we do get through 17 and 18, I think we need to revisit 1 through 18 just to make sure that we're all in concurrence on our answers. And I would leave that to when we're fresh.
Okay.
Can I make a suggestion? And I realized going back to my 2 questions, I looked at part 2, but I did not go back to part 1. And I, of course, am reminded by all my excellent colleagues that it's our job to correct the part 1 as well. So
yeah, I think that, yeah.
Sorry, so Betsy, maybe I make a suggestion that we hit that first before we move ahead if we're running out of gas. Does that make sense?
Well, doesn't it make sense though, Clark, that we get through 17 and 18 tonight, and then in our next review, we go back, we make sure that we don't have any corrections to part 1, because I have a couple that I didn't even prepare tonight. And, I have some questions about how we answered question 11. I just don't, I'd rather do that part when we really are fresh.
Okay, that sounds
these are 17 and 18 are big ones, but I also think that we've prepared, this evening for 17 and 18, and it's going to be big, but I think that we can get through the form and then do our editing and proofreading in the next session.
Duly
Does that make
noted. I
sense?
appreciate that. I agree.
Great. All right. So John and I are on for question 17 about consistency with community plans. So I also did not go back through part 1. Sorry. But I was really more thinking about the vision plan, the comp plan, the LWRP, the 2011 zoning, because these are all documents that were created. These are our community plans. This is everything that we draw on. And also it asks us to consider county and regional land use plans, and like those prepared by Scenic Hudson and coastal management policies. So I took a look at those. And then I went back and I looked at the seeker handbook, and section F, as we've already discovered tonight, asks us to look at what's within 1,500 feet of the property. So when I was thinking about community plans, we have to consider the river, the South Bay, Riverfront Park, the 4.4 acres to the south, Basilica, historic assets like the Amtrak station, historic districts in Dunn, and any potential development at the CAS site. And then section G in the seeker handbook asks us to consider whether or not the project will make it easier for other land uses to move into the area in the future. And I think with the development of CAS in the offing, we have to take that into consideration with community plans. And it also says, is the project in an underused area that could be the target of future development? And that certainly is a yes. So then I went back to the FEAF, the FEAF handbook for guidance on question 17. And it asks us to look at the vision plan, the comp plan, the LWRP, analyze whether or not the proposed use is consistent with the vision and goals of those plans. Is the intensity of the proposal similar or different from surrounding areas? So this is where intensity comes in. Will it generate new or more traffic? Certainly it will. And is the project consistent with the overall scale and intensity? That's for us to decide. So if I'm looking back through history and thinking about that site and adjacent, what's been going on? What have people been thinking about for our waterfront since the beginning of time? And back in the 1970s, there was a proposed restaurant at the riverfront embayments, which envisioned a changing waterfront. 95 and 96 was the vision plan. And that promotes the goal of enhancing the quality of life in Hudson overall. And one of the primary goals of the vision plan, and I'll quote you here, is to enhance the city's quality of life as a place to live, work, and recreate through revitalization of Hudson's core, Warren Street, 4th Street, and the waterfront. Conserve historical and natural resources along the Hudson River waterfront and strengthen the link to Warren Street and the core of Hudson. Encourage compatible forms of economic development, including commercial development and tourism, while maintaining the overall historic character. So that's the vision from 1995 and 96. Then in 1982, there was a Common Council resolution and a compromise agreement with the region's sportsmen that confirmed that there would be no new or expanded development in the South Bay. I think that's important.
So can you repeat that last bit again?
Yes,
Right.
in a compromise agreement with the region's sportsmen, the Common Council passed a resolution in 1982 confirming that there would be no new or expanded development in the South Bay. Then the LWRP overall sought to create a vision which will serve the city and the state long after those involved today are forgotten. I thought that was an important thing for us to keep in mind. This isn't about us. This is forever. And we've got to get this right now. This has been going on for a long time. So the comprehensive plan, going back a little bit, the number one goal, protect the traditional character of Hudson's downtown and neighborhoods. Design policies should encourage mixed use development in high activity areas like Warren Street, Front Street, and the waterfront. We're all familiar with the big St. Lawrence fight, and I went back and I looked pretty carefully at a lot of information that was generated at that time. And then Secretary of State Randy Daniels in 2005 was responsible for a coastal consistency determination. And he was very instrumental in instructing how the waterfront was to be rezoned. And a lot of this resulted in the zoning that we have today. And he noted in his comments that, and this is a quote, based on this review of Hudson's past planning and implementation activities, it's clear the city's waterfront has been and will continue to be transformed from a private industrial waterfront to a public waterfront for boating, tourism, commercial, and other compatible uses. Now, I didn't actually know much about the state's coastal management program, so I did a little bit of research on that, and its intent is to energize, and this is quoting again, to energize economic growth with waterfront redevelopment as the priority. It directs communities to restore, revitalize, and redevelop deteriorated and/or underutilized waterfront areas for commercial, industrial, cultural, recreational, and/or other compatible uses. So a lot of our zoning came out of this kind of a review.
Betsy?
Yes.
The coastal management plan was pretty much responsible for the oil refinery not being built on the waterfront in Hudson back in the mid 80s also. So they've been around for a long time and they've done a lot. So.
Yeah, we rely on it throughout our zoning code and the comp plan. And, even when we're talking about city plans, even the DRI, which recognizes Colaruso's dock operations, notes that recent organic entrepreneurial development of the Bridge District has primed Hudson for the inevitable next phase of its revitalization, which includes reimagining the waterfront for expanded public use and enjoyment. So then I reread for I don't know how many times the zoning code, which is full of a lot of information, some of it conflicting, and I never know quite how to resolve those things. But when in 325, the establishment of zoning plans and purposes, Section 5 calls for a gradual elimination of non-conforming uses. And I read that and I went back to some information from St. Lawrence days, and even Jeff Baker, in several memos that he wrote at that time, commented on how there's a grudging tolerance for non-conforming uses, but that they really are designed to go away over time. And so I will share those comments with you in writing. It's a little bit easier because some of them are kind of long and dense. So when we're looking at community plans, I think we have to keep all these things in mind, that there's a long history of this community's desire to redevelop its waterfront to the highest and best use. And that seems to be in everything that I read, that it's a greener, friendlier, more person-forward waterfront than we have right now. So we turn to the questions. John, did you want to add to any of this?
No, I don't.
I'm going to make one quick comment, Betsy, and I appreciate that. That is truly an excellent review. Thank you so much. I think we should all keep in mind, which we've talked about for a while, that we are looking because of Melconian, et cetera, and the applicant has lost their right to operate on the waterfront. And I believe we're in agreement that this application should be viewed as a new application on a blank piece of land because they have no right to be there. So I just wanted to throw that in there, given all the statements you made regarding the history of land use plans, etc.
Yeah, it's complicated. So consistency with community plans, the proposed action is not consistent with adopted land use plans. I believe that to be true, Ryan. So if you would check yes, please.
Well, I mean, so we also have to acknowledge that the zoning law specifically allows this as a use.
That it is a conditional use.
Yes.
Thank you, Victoria. That is in here. I just, there it is. 324, 325, yeah. So the proposed actions land use components may be different from or in sharp contrast to current surrounding land use patterns. This is interesting because we've got an historic train station, we've got a public park, we've got Basilico, which is a venue, we've got Kite's Nest. We're gonna have development at Cavs, we've got
Wick.
The Wick, we've got Kitties. So I think the district is developing in a way that Hudson always envisioned as a mixed use, very vibrant place for people. And having an industrial concern down there certainly is not in keeping with how that district is developing.
Also keeping in mind LNB, what's happening there is really in the last years is
Absolutely. You're
Right.
absolutely right. Because LNB was virtually a vacant factory for building for a long time. That was actually the preferred truck route, was to go by LNB, and not the private road. So that certainly has changed. So moderate to large impact for A. The proposed action will cause the permanent population of the city, town, or village in which the project is located to grow by more than 5%. That is no. The proposed action is inconsistent with local land use plans or zoning regulations. This is yes and no. I mean, I'm going to say moderate to large impact, but to Victoria's point, this is where I was going to bring this up. It is a conditional use per the code. So this is a real problem in our code. I don't know how to resolve it.
It's a conditional use in the code, and the comprehensive plan, acknowledges the use.
Because it was, well, when the comp plan was written, it was acknowledged as a sort of a grandfathered. It was there. It was an existing use.
Right. It's covered in our code relative to triggering the review.
That's right. That's right.
Same for the LWRP.
So the non-conforming use was written into our 2011 law, and of course we are here because of that, with the triggering.
Right.
Right, but so I struggle with the concept of finding it inconsistent with your zoning law, because your zoning law, the only reason they're allowed before you is because your zoning law put in a special exception to allow this non-conforming use to become conforming.
With our review and our conditional use permit granting.
Right, but consistent with the zoning law.
If we decide to do that.
Doesn't it say here land use plans or zoning regulations? I don't know technically land use plans, the definition of that is, but I thought that what was highlighted in a lot of what Betsy just ran through from the LWRP to everything else. I mean, we've kind of covered the zoning regulation part of it, but the vision for the area
is very different than what was written into the zoning. Yes, and these things are in conflict with one another. I read and reread these things, and it's very hard to.
Betsy, I would, I mean, the reality is, if this question said the proposed action is consistent with local land use plans or zoning regulations, I would say yes, it is consistent with local land use plans or zoning regulations. However, it is also inconsistent with local land use plans and zoning regulations because they are in conflict. And we're going to get into this in the next section, but the language simultaneously supports and delimits the operations here. And it's why we're here at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening, right? That we have a conflict in the way that we're told to proceed. So I'm totally fine with this, with this being a moderate to large impact.
Yeah, and I mean, we all have to be honest. We have to acknowledge the zoning. It's written into our zoning, but how we actually resolve this is to be determined.
Well, but how we resolve this is also written into our zoning, right? Like it's there, and we're going to get to it in a few minutes. But
yes,
but I think this is the burden that the board is carrying now, is to resolve the conflict and resolve the inconsistencies.
I don't know if this fits into this, Betsy and everybody, but I think that we can't lose sight of the fact that there's a huge difference between 2011 and the amount of trucks that were to our city and now. I mean, there's a huge difference here that I think is important to just keep in the back of our minds. I don't know if this applies to what you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Laura, especially because, we tend to be reading the section that was in dispute earlier about the use as of 2011. And this application is an intensification of use. And the question, I believe, is that intensification of use still consistent with the parameters of our zoning, or is it make it inconsistent?
I had the court ruling in front of me, which basically highlighted there's a knot here to untie, and there's no good answer, right? One could argue on both sides, and there's clearly, arguments on both sides, but it seems like it's our job to make that judgment call. No one else is.
And I think we will. Well, we're obligated to. So the proposed action, if we could move on to D, the proposed action is inconsistent with any county plans or other regional land use plans. I've been studying some of Scenic Hudson's information, and it would seem that there's some inconsistencies with some regional land use plans. I will cite those. I just don't have that piece of paper in front of me tonight. I am so sorry.
I think too that the fact that Athens has now banned any industrial use of their waterfront is a regional plan that might, fit in this category.
Did they get rid of that tire burning operational?
Yes.
Yeah, they did.
So
the Athens, sorry.
Oh,
I was just add on to John's point that the Athens decision is interesting because our code explicitly requires us to consider views from the water. And Athens is, directly across the water from us.
Right.
So I would check moderate to large there. E, the proposed action may cause a change in the density of development that is not supported by the existing infrastructure or is distinct from the existing infrastructure. That I said no. This one is interesting. The proposed area action is located in an area characterized by low density development that will require new or expanded public infrastructure. Oh, no, that one's a no. Sorry. I got ahead of myself. It's G. It's G that's in conflict, I think. Did you have a question about F?
Yeah. F and E, what do they mean by the density of development that is not supported by existing infrastructure? For example, the CAS area that will hopefully someday be developed, or is this a different, are they talking about something else?
I think
I was thinking about operations and thinking that what I think the E and F are really talking about CAS, like when that comes before us.
So this is talking about if this was a residential development project, if they were putting up, 500 condos or 200 condos.
Right. We
needed to put in new sewer and new water and new garbage routes.
Yeah, that's how I read E and F.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then G was interesting. The proposed action may induce secondary development impacts such as residential or commercial development not included in the proposed action. The answer is no, it won't, but it might actually inhibit it in an area where we know that there is proposed development. So I didn't really know how to answer this question. I thought perhaps we should put it in the other category, is that in fact, the action could well inhibit development that we know is coming that is virtually almost adjacent to the property.
Good idea, Betsy. Let's do that, put it in H then.
So answer G, no, but then with a note on G that it's really actually quite the opposite. It will inhibit growth.
So the way, just to consider, because the way I read the proposed action may induce secondary development impact, doesn't say whether it's going to encourage or deter those secondary impacts. So I think the concern that you're representing is that, under, at least in my read of it, but that's just, again, the way I read
Right.
I think it's a good point.
Inhibiting could be a secondary development impact, right? Yeah.
And it's
totally
first, is it positive or negative impact?
Right. So that would mean
If we if we switch the word induced for inhibit, that would be.
Oh, but it induced an impact, right? And then the induced impact could be a negative. It could be a prohibiting or delimiting of future development, right? That's an induced impact. I mean,
we mark yes, moderate
Yeah.
to large, and then explain it in more in H.
Okay, that's perfect. May inhibit. And we also have to acknowledge that soon to be redeveloped or developed, it's not even going to be redeveloped, developed area could become a source of significant future growth and tax base for the city.
Absolutely.
It's our last
Piece of land.
Last piece of land that we can develop.
Absolutely.
So that is 17 as far as I'm concerned. Anybody have any questions or other comments?
Well, there's the CAS property, sorry, and there's also the Dunn building. We don't know what will happen to that.
That's, yeah, that redevelopment with Dunn, you're right, Laura. I hadn't even thought about Dunn there, but yes, you're right.
And waterfront development in general, with the.
So I'm happy to send you all what I wrote up. So that you have it.
I would say too, I mean, Jason, of course, is Basilica, and of course, you could ask them specifically what impacts, massive truck increases next to them might have on their business or their arts operation. But
well, we know they've written several very specific letters to the board on that very subject.
That's already on the record that they're have clear concerns about their, again, it's a arts organization that contributes massively to Hudson's, not just cultural life.
I think we're thinking I agree, Clark, but right now I think we're talking about development, of spaces that have not been developed yet. But whatever. Ryan, can you add may inhibit future mixed use development? And I would put i.e. the CAS property, the old Dunn building. I don't know if it has another name. The brick Dunn building.
Basilica Phase 3.
What?
Basilica Phase 3. That's
right.
That's the site, kind of catacorner. That's the site that would be closest to where the trucks leave the Colarusso property and enter the public road there. Like where it's a little parking lot now.
Yeah.
Directly parallel to the. It's directly parallel to the
front street
termination of the private road. Yeah, yeah.
And then should we say waterfront development in general? Because, I mean, there's talk of the boat thing going over someplace else. And, I mean, I would just say waterfront development at large or something.
Great. Thank you all.
Good job, Betsy.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, John. That was great.
Thank you, John.
Number 18.
Yeah. So, Steve and Larry, you're on.
Thank you. Larry, did you want to start by reading a portion of the LWRP?
Yeah. So Steve and I worked on this, and one of the things that was, I think, most important for us was to get a handle on how we might look at both the zoning code and the LWRP for what they have to say about community character, and how we might reconcile that with the very clear language in both the zoning code and the LWRP that supports the application. So I'm gonna read from a memo that Betsy and Steve and I put together a couple of weeks ago that sort of guided our thinking on this. And I'll try and be really explicit about what is the language that we developed in the memo and what is an actual quote from the zoning code and subsequently the LWRP. And it's a little bit lengthy, but I think it's important to have it in the record. So we wrote that the zoning code explicitly supports continued use of the deep water port, subject to but not limited to clearly defined parameters and until and unless such uses become incompatible with the city's objectives as also described in the code. And I think that to me is the biggest question before the board, right? The zoning code and the LWRP are both very clearly supportive of the operations unless and until such uses become incompatible with the city's objectives as they are also described in our documents. So let's read first from 325.17.1.d. And this is a quote from the code. Where one of the actions or events specified in subsection D above is proposed, in addition to the provisions of Article 8, and as more fully set forth in 325.17.1F2, the planning board shall impose additional conditions on such use as may be necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of residents living in close proximity to commercial docks and the public while recreating and using public facilities adjacent to commercial docks as authorized in the local waterfront revitalization program. End of quote. All right, so that paragraph notes that the review is subject to approval of the planning board in accordance with Article 8 hereof. Here are the requirements of Article 8. This is from 325-34, permits for conditional uses. The planning board the planning board shall take into consideration the public health, safety, and welfare, the comfort and convenience of the public in general, and of the residents of the immediate neighborhood in particular, and may prescribe appropriate conditions and safeguards as may be required in order that the result of its action may, to the maximum extent possible, further the expressed intent of this chapter and the accomplishment of the following objectives in particular. The code then lists some objectives. The one that seemed to matter most for community character was paragraph 2 of 325-34. Quote, that the proposed use shall be of such location, size, and character that, in general, it will be in harmony with the appropriate and orderly development of the district in which it is proposed to be situated and will not be detrimental to the orderly development of adjacent properties in accordance with the zoning classification of such properties. So that to me is a really clear framework in which the zoning asks us to operate, right? The dock operations are clearly supported and promoted by the code until and unless such actions trigger concerns in Article 8, and which are very clearly laid out in Article 8. The LWRP has a comparable set of guidelines. The LWRP this is from our memo. The LWRP explicitly supports continued use of the deep water port, subject to but not limited to clearly defined parameters, and until and unless such uses become incompatible with the city's objectives, as also described in the LWRP. And there are the way the LWRP is structured, there are a series of policies that are essentially objectives in the LWRP. The next quote is from policy 2 of the LWRP, and this is concerning the dock operations. So I'll read this one. This is policy 2 of the LWRP. Quote, continued operation of the existing stone aggregate stockpiling and shipping use is consistent with Hudson's maritime history and contributes to the tax base of the city. That's a really clear statement. That's me editorialized now. That the LWRP promotes the use. Mm-hmm. Continuing the quote, however, modernization of the activity must be subject to a conditional use permit and site plan approval, which imposes appropriate controls on the use and site to ensure that the activity will be in character with the city's waterfront plan and complies with the guidelines in this policy. Specifically, shipping operations at the port must not conflict with or compromise the city's ability to meet the goal of Policy 4 to promote such desirable activities as recreational fishing, marinas, historic preservation, cultural pursuits, and other compatible activities. Again, I just want to repeat that last sentence. Specifically, this is from the LWRP. Specifically, shipping operations at the port must not conflict with or compromise the city's ability to meet the goal of Policy 4. So let's find out what the goals of Policy 4 are. They're very clear. Again, I'm going to quote the LWRP. Quote, the community character has experienced a shift away from industry towards a mixed commercial and residential setting characterized by dramatic expansion of retail uses, restaurants, arts, and recreational opportunities, especially recreational opportunities focused on riverfront recreation. The city's vision plan and the adopted comprehensive plan cite the redevelopment of the city's waterfront area as key to continued expansion of the city's core commercial district along Warren Street. Any development in the LWRA must enhance and support the continued revitalization of the city's existing community character. And again, that last sentence I think is incredibly important. I'll read it again. Any development in the LWRA must enhance and support the continued revitalization of the city's existing community character. And I think, you know, that this is the dilemma that we're facing as a board, right? Both the zoning code and the LWRP asked us to accept, maybe even embrace the operations until and unless they become detrimental. And I think that's the question before us, right? Is this a detriment now? And I think at that, you know, my understanding of the question, I'll hand it back to Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. I mean, you know, for us, in answering this first question, the proposed project is inconsistent with the existing community character. You know, this is kind of the bridge from the vision that Betsy just laid out in the previous question, and everything I think highlighted by Larry. We have, you know, the character of this community as it exists today is the kind of partial realization of that vision of vibrant mixed use. If we're considering this application, treating it as a new application, one that's lost its non-conforming use, you know, I think that our answer has to be that this is not consistent with the community character. So the answer here would be yes. Now, before we go through the individual questions, there's one, and please, anyone, if you have feedback on that, please stop me. One amendment to part 1 in E3E. Okay. Can you move the, yeah, just so we can read it. Does the project site contain, or is it substantially contiguous to, a building, archaeological site, or district which is located or listed on the National or State Register of Historic Places, or that has been determined by the Commissioner, et cetera, to be eligible for listing on the State Register of Historic Places? So we just have a few additions of places that have become eligible, I think maybe even since this was, this application was created. So understanding is that we should add Basilica. She became eligible in.
Oh, but Basilica, I thought was on there. As
I believe,
the
and I
railway
can pull it up.
steel Spring Boundary Sandhouse.
1213.
Sorry, guys, this was answered in my question. Let's see. So we have this probably.
Okay, sorry guys, if that's already on there, that's fine. We can, there's the.
See what you were gonna add, Steve, just in case we forgot something, but oh, what question is that?
Well, and the WIC has now been listed.
Yeah, the WIC, What was my,
Then, yeah, the Amtrak station,
yes,
and then we
This-
noted the
yeah.
salt storage building as well.
yes.
And that's this building, the New York and New England Cement and Lime Company Lower Mill is the on-site.
Steve, we did this together, and I can't remember what about the tower?
Oh,
Yes, I think the tower, I think that in my list, the tower is there. Ryan, let's just check this against my other question where we answered this already once, I think.
I think the comments that we have in here are in
Are
regard to when we reviewed it, and when we reviewed it with you, Laura. And, you know, I just I'll pull over, you know, the CRIS system so we can just see, and it doesn't rely on me. So yes, the Basilica building is the railway, steel spring foundry, and sand house, which is determined eligible, and that was a recent determination made. SHPO also made an eligibility determination on the on-site storage building, which they refer to as the New York and New England Cement and Lime Company Lower Mill Cement Storage Building. And then we see here the South Bay Mill, or the WIC is now listed. The Hudson Station, Amtrak Station is eligible, but not listed as of you know, the most recent date. And then the Hudson and Boston Railroad Shop, the Dunn Building, also has an eligibility determination. This site has been, or it's the eligibility is undetermined, and I'm sorry, I just from the dot on the screen, I'm not familiar with.
Oh, that's the
14 to
L&B
7.
warehouse.
L&B, okay.
Yeah, I would think so. So does this also submit to the same 1500 radius?
Oh,
1500
so
radius?
the question that you're looking at on the EAF is whether it's adjacent to or substantially contiguous. So
Okay.
the area that Ryan showed, you know, was basically what could be substantially contiguous. But for the purposes of question 18, if you're talking about what the character of the area is, you're not limited to substantially contiguous. You can talk about, you know, what's the character of the waterfront generally.
Got it.
And you're noting historic resources as being part of the character.
I'm just suggesting that if we're answering it the same as we did, Ryan, check number 10, question number 10 in part 2, because we all as a board went through all that and we stuff if we want.
Wait, I'm sorry. So what is the WIC? Because I didn't see that on the list that Ryan just pulled up.
That's
The WIC, South Bay, correct?
Used to be a candle making factory. It's one of the oldest buildings.
Yes.
I mean,
right here. And
it's catty corner. Okay. A very liberal.
Oh, and I was wrong.
corner.
The black dot is the old CAS site, not the L&B.
And then L&B is here. Yeah. So yeah, you know, obviously our site is here, Dunn, the station, the WIC's here, and then Basilica. So kind of surrounding the site. The WIC is, you know, theoretically the furthest distant or separated site from the project site.
Got it.
I guess given what Victoria said, should the lighthouse be on this list as well?
Oh, wow. It's in the view shed.
Yeah, exactly.
It might even be within 1,500 feet.
So I'm gonna add here. No, I wanted to add. All right.
Add the water
I think
tower.
that
The water tower.
the site silo, is that what you're referring to,
Yeah.
Laura?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can, and that I'll put under storage building, and storage silo.
Right. All right, thank you. So we can go back to part 2. Okay. So the proposed action may replace or eliminate existing facilities, structures, or areas of historic importance to the community. Our answer was no. The proposed action may create a demand for additional community services, schools, police, and fire. We said no. Proposed action may displace affordable or low-income housing in an area where there is a shortage of such housing. The answer was no. Proposed action may interfere with the use or enjoyment of officially recognized or designated public resources. We said yes. Particularly thinking about the waterfront park.
Small or moderate?
Consistent with the predominant. Oh, sorry. We said for moderate to large was our answer to B. Actually, and Larry, do you want to answer on E? The proposed action is inconsistent with the predominant architectural scale and character.
Well, I would say that's a moderate to large impact, right? I mean, we have an historic context, and we are looking at gravel piles.
Finally, the proposed action is inconsistent with the character of the existing natural landscape. We said moderate to large. Thinking about the Hudson River. We didn't note other impacts as far as I recall, Larry, but correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I just think the only thing that might be an issue here is that, we've got to consider the view from the water. And I don't know what this, we want to remind ourselves of that here. But it's something that to date, the applicant hasn't addressed that provision in our code, which requires us to consider the view of the project from the water.
Bear with me here for a minute. I just want to scroll back to aesthetic resources and see if, yeah, so under aesthetic resources, we did add other impacts. The proposed action may result in adverse impacts from the river, and selected moderate to large may occur.
Awesome.
So it looks like we've done it.
That is fantastic.
So Ryan, what I'm going to suggest is, would you please send this completed form to the board so that we can review our answers for consistency? Because as we went along, we learned more information from one another. And I think we discovered a lot more. So I think we all just want to go back and make sure that our answers are consistent, that they reflect what we learned later in the process, and just give it a good hard look before we move on to section 3.
Absolutely. And you'll recall that you'll see there were some highlighted areas or some blanks that I added in, that we had posed some questions to the applicant. So those will all be in there. And then as you go through, it would be beneficial as we draft, as a team effort, as we draft part 3, if there are specific things that come to mind under certain criterion that, are very, important to carry through, that maybe don't clearly pop off the page with the question, whether, those can just be jotted down as notes from everybody. And I think that would, help the process of making sure all of the thoughts and concerns that have come up over the, number of months that we've been going through this make their way into part 3. The nice thing is we have the recordings of the meetings available, which is, good to look back upon. But as we go through it with everything we know now, if board members can, take those items, and, however, Betsy, you'd like to convey those, if everybody, if you want everybody to send those to me, I can kind of start putting them in one common point, even if it's bullets or thoughts, just so that when we go through part 3, they're all in one place.
I think that's a great idea, Ryan, and thank you for offering that.
Betsy, can I just add one thing, if that's okay?
Of course.
when Ryan sends us the part 2, could we also get the annotated version of part 1 so that we can check that for
What I will do-
consistency and omissions?
What I will do is the forms that I just had up on the screen, I'm going to save them. I'll update them with today's date, and I will send them out. But you know, if there's some typos and some shorthand, please don't hold that against me.
You're forgiven in advance. So board, I'm looking ahead at the April agenda, which is a monster. If we were to add Colarusso in, do we want to have a special meeting, a special planning board meeting, a real one, not a workshop, to continue this process? How do you feel about that?
Do we want to? Probably not, but we probably should.
It seems like we're obligated to.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I just don't think that we can, well, let me tell you what's going to be on tap. Just based on our March agenda, we will have Verizon, we will have the Galvan project, and we will have the hospital project. And I don't know if there are new applications coming our way. They have until April 3rd.
I think that it also makes us less inhibited to you know, to converse when we're not so worried about other applications and, you know, attorneys having to wait for their thing to come up. This is better.
You know, it is. And, you know, this meeting itself is a reflection of the fact that last month was those projects, right? And it was too much to do this one and that. And I think that, you know, the applicants before us, they need us to make progress on their applications. I'm with John. I don't know if I want it, but I think it's our duty.
I wanted to say I appreciate this session a lot because we could focus on it and not be rushed, and having this very important application. And I think respect to the applicant, this was a great session, and I really appreciate the fact that we could carve it out for one special meeting without being rushed and, you know, praised by other stuff as well.
Then why don't Rebecca and I look at the city website, and we'll identify an evening that doesn't conflict with other city meetings. And then I will get a note out to the applicant and to everybody concerned, Ryan and the board, and we will set another special meeting specifically for this application.
You're thinking the second half of April?
Yes.
Great.
I mean, for my preference, a Tuesday, like this meeting, would work. What is it, the 4th Tuesday?
Okay, we need to check the city website and see what's up, so that we're not in conflict with a common council meeting or something. But Rebecca and I can look into that, and we'll get a date out to you all soon. I mean, really soon. And we'll have to, yeah.
I want to do what Larry suggested at the next Colarusso meeting and go over part 2. You know, everybody that didn't really pay attention to part 1 is going to look at their part 1 and then look at their part 2. And then we're going to go over part 2. Is that what you're suggesting, Larry? That's one question. And then 2, Betsy, is there anything we need to do to prepare for part 3?
I think that's a good question for Ryan. I think basically part 3, my understanding of part 3 is that we're going back, looking at 1 and 2 and deciding the ultimate impact of these things. I mean, is it overall correct, Ryan?
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it.
Thing that's been checked moderate to large, we need to go through and, you know, basically provide an analysis to say, you know, we've identified whether there may be an impact, but now we need to do a little more analysis to say, you know, to what level will it be significant and will it be adverse? And those are the two kind of determinations that are made in part 3 before making a determination on the entire project. Typically, those Part 3 forms on, it varies from community to community, but typically it's a collaborative effort between council and, engineering or planner, consultant. So that's something that as we move forward, we can draft, and I'm sure as, because of the board's significant involvement in reviewing Part 2, the input of, the board members overall, but also, specifically all the hard work you guys did, we want to make sure that that gets reflected in the Part 3 as well.
It would be ideal to have a draft Part 3 for discussion at least, because that's going to take a long time to put together and to get right.
Paul Colarusso, you have a question or a comment? Need to unmute.
Yep, I am muted. I just want to say thank you for considering another special meeting.
You're welcome. I think it's in all our best interest.
I agree.
Good. Okay, thank you for being so accommodating. Rebecca?
Yeah, I do just want to know, I looked at the city calendar and there seems to be a meeting every Tuesday of April.
Which could be, but it depends it depends on what the meetings are.
Yeah, okay, we can go through that.
Yeah, we will. If it's a common council meeting, I don't think we should conflict, but there are others that maybe it wouldn't matter so much. So you and I can go through that. I'm traveling tomorrow, but on Friday.
In terms of Victoria's suggestion that we have a draft Part 3, who would write that? I mean, that means that it would be compiled, it would be composed without, without not in the public then.
Well, so, I mean, the Part 3 is going to end up being 25 pages. It's not something that I think we want to wordsmith during a meeting. Normally, as Ryan said, the engineer or I would put it together, but, I know you guys are have very distinct ideas. So it might be helpful if you each take your own part and then send it to us and we can start compiling it. But I leave it up to you guys how you want to do it.
Oh, okay, if we were going to do that, Victoria, can I choose 2 board members to do this with? Because I really feel I would need some assistance. I've never written one of these. I don't know how to do it. So
I can't imagine why not. And we've done the digging, we've done the work to get through Part 2. So so it's really a matter of writing up our notes in some sort of a little bit more of a narrative fashion, I think. And I think by all means, you could share it with another board member. Laura, of course you can.
I could share.
If I may, Laura, to that point, I think don't worry about making sure that it's wordsmithed to death to make sure that refers to it as the proposed action or anything like that, jargon-wise, terminology-wise. If they're, it's a bulleted list or of like, this is what we are considering. These are the reasons that we're making this determination. Then Victoria and I can take that in and essentially wordsmith it into a final, supporting document for the board's determination and review of or anything's acted on.
My own wordsmithing. So if I wordsmith it wrong, then that's fine. But I feel good if I got together with a couple of board members and get out
and you're well within your rights to do that.
Dave
Laura.
partially strained his lat today. Look at how big.
What?
I don't know who that was. So Laura, yes, you're perfectly at liberty to do that. So let's do it. Let's write up our portions and not worrying too much about the wordsmithing, but just making sure we get the details down. And also let's look back at parts 1 and 2 to make sure that for consistency, and let Ryan know if we have questions or comments on anything that has happened before up until tonight. And we'll move this along.
Right, and I guess I also want to remind everyone that if there's an impact that you're going to find has not been mitigated by the project, or something that, you know, is just large and not something that you think is appropriate, the next step is not, it wouldn't be denial. It would be that the applicant has to go and prepare a full environmental review. So they'd have to do, you know, the full review. And so it just takes us to the next level.
Right.
That
Exactly.
deck.
Yep. Just go back and review that secret cookbook.
Yep.
That's, yeah, because that guides every step of the way. All right, so I will get to you as soon as I possibly can with a proposed date and for our next meeting, and a reminder to you all that our April 13th meeting is starting at 5 o'clock with a workshop very much like this for the Verizon proposal, April 13th at 5. Yeah. All right. Thank you all very, very much. I think we made great progress. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you. I'll email part 1 and 2 out to the board this evening.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Betsy.
Thanks.
Night.
Yeah.
Mm.